Moonlit Souls, welcome back to Wild Alpha Tales. Before we dive into tonight's twisted tale of forbidden love and ancient power, do me a favor, haul at that like button and join our pack by subscribing. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when a human woman discovers she's the last of a mystical bloodline and the only thing standing between an exiled werewolf king and total annihilation. Tonight's story spans 13 chapters of passion, danger, and destiny. Let's begin. Chapter 1. Blood on the Boundary. The scent hit me first. Sharp copper mixed with rain-soaked earth, the unmistakable signature of fresh blood spilled on sacred ground. Then came the sounds, labored breathing punctuated by two impossibly fragile cries that seemed to defy the October cold pressing down on the Valewood like a living thing. I shouldn't have crossed the boundary. My grandmother Morgana's voice echoed in memory. Beyond that line, Vesper, lies where sense ends and death begins. The townsfolk called it the Forbidden Territory, though most were too frightened to even name it directly. They just whispered about the things that hunted there, things with amber eyes and ancient grudges against humanity. But those cries... I pulled my threadbare sweater tighter, tucking strands of pale hair behind my ears for the 100th time. The mist rising from the forest floor made everything ghostly, uncertain. My flashlight beam trembled as I pushed deeper into territory I'd only observed from a safe distance. 3 more steps, and the light found them. A man, no, something more than a man, lay crumpled against an ancient oak's roots. His body curved protectively around 2 tiny bundles that moved with desperate, weakening motion. Blood soaked through his torn shirt, black as ink in the flashlight's glow. The metallic scent grew overwhelming. Babies. 2 of them. My breath caught. The ceremonial blade my grandmother had pressed into my palm on my 16th birthday suddenly felt molten hot against my thigh, as if responding to proximity to whatever lay bleeding before me. "Carry this always, Vesper," Morgana had whispered, her weathered hands closing mine around the bone handle. "Our family protects, even when we cannot fight." I'd thought it superstition then. Another relic like the dried herbs hanging in every doorway of our cottage, or the salt lines she obsessively renewed across our thresholds. Now, standing before this broken tableau, I understood. The man's eyes snapped open. I froze, expecting pain or fear, the glassy stare of approaching death. Instead, I faced pure, concentrated fury that burned through the darkness between us like wildfire. His irises caught the moonlight filtering through the canopy and threw it back with an amber glow. Not human. Not entirely. "Stay back," he growled, voice barely human. Blood bubbled at the corner of his mouth. "Leave us." Any sensible person would have run. But the baby's cries had grown weaker, more sporadic, and something deeper than fear, something woven into the marrow of who I was, refused retreat. "I can help," I said, steadier than I felt. "The children need warmth. They need milk." His laugh was bitter, cutting. "You know what they are?" "I know they're innocent," I answered. "And dying." Pain spasmed across his face, momentarily cracking the rage. He looked down at the bundles in his arms, and something raw broke through, love mingled with utter helplessness. "They'll kill them too," he whispered, more to himself than me. "The council won't allow half-bloods to live. My punishment for loving a human. But they..." His voice fractured. "They've done nothing." His fever-bright eyes fixed on me again. "Why would you help? You're human." The question hung between us, heavy with implications I couldn't fully grasp. Why indeed? This wasn't my fight. These weren't my people. Wisdom dictated slow retreat and practiced amnesia. But my grandmother's voice wouldn't quiet. "Our family protects." "Because I can," I finally said. "Because no one else will." Something shifted in his gaze, not softening exactly, but recalibration. A predator reassessing. He tried to move and gasped as fresh blood soaked through his shirt. "They tried to execute me," he explained in painful bursts. "Traditional way. Silver wounds. Should have died already. Fighting it for them." He nodded toward the infants. I knelt beside him. close enough now to see the babies' faces clearly. Tiny features pinched with cold and hunger. One had dark hair, like her father. The other was nearly bald with only pale fuzz suggesting future color. "I have a cabin," I heard myself say. "Not far. If you can walk." "They'll track us," he cut in. "By scent. My blood." "My grandmother taught me how to mask scent," I said automatically. "Herbs and smoke. Old ways." His eyes narrowed with new intensity.
"What are you?"
"Not just humans." "From a family that remembers," I replied, holding his gaze. He studied me for a long moment before nodding once. Decision made. "Help me up." It took all my strength to support him. He was massive, far taller than I'd realized, solid with muscle beneath the torn, blood-soaked clothes. He cradled the babies against his chest with one arm while I took as much of his weight as I could bear. Each step cost him. Twice his legs nearly buckled. Twice I thought we wouldn't make it. But we did. My cabin appeared through the trees like salvation, windows glowing amber, with a fire I'd left burning. It wasn't much, one room with a small kitchen, a bed, a table, the hearth. But it was mine, built with my own hands on the edge of Thorn family land after my grandmother's death made the cottage unbearable with memories. Once inside, I helped him to the bed, taking the babies only when he couldn't hold them any longer. His eyes never left them as I laid them on a blanket near the fire and began stripping off their cold, damp wrappings. "They need milk," I said, examining them.
"Twins."
"Girls, both of them. Maybe a week old." "I have goat's milk," he said weakly. "Not ideal, but it will sustain them temporarily." I worked quickly, warming milk and feeding the tiny girls with a dropper I used for injured birds. Their hunger was desperate, heartbreaking. Between feedings, I turned to the man and began removing his shirt to reveal wounds that made my stomach turn. 5 deep gashes across his torso, each bleeding sluggishly. The pattern was deliberate. "Ritual. Silver," he explained, watching me examine them. "Prevents healing." I nodded as if this made perfect sense. "I need to clean these." He didn't flinch as I washed away blood and dirt with water steeped in healing herbs. Only when I began stitching the deepest gash did his jaw tighten, muscle jumping beneath skin. "You've done this before," he observed. "My grandmother was the closest thing to a doctor this area had. She taught me everything." "Where is she now?" The needle paused.
"Gone."
3 winters ago." "And your parents?" "Never knew them." The words came clipped. It was always just us. When I finished the last stitch, I wrapped his torso in clean bandages and helped him drink tea steeped with willow bark and other herbs from Morgana's garden. "For pain and fever," I explained. "Though I don't know if it works the same for your kind." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You can say it. Werewolf." The word hung in the air, transforming my familiar cabin into something strange. I'd known, of course, the amber eyes, the unnatural strength, the way he'd spoken of execution and counsel. But hearing it spoken aloud made it undeniably real. "Werewolf," I repeated, testing the weight of it. "And the babies." His voice softened, eyes drifting to where they now slept by the fire. "My daughters. Half-bloods. Their mother was human." I waited, but his expression closed like a door slamming shut. "Rest," I said instead. "I need to mask our trail." Outside, I worked quickly, burning the mixture Morgana had taught me. Sage, rosemary, cedar, and plants with names too old for modern tongues. The smoke would confuse any nose trying to follow our scent. Next, I scattered salt and powdered silver in a wide circle around the cabin, not enough to harm, but enough to make sensitive noses avoid the area. When I returned, he was watching from the bed, eyes glittering. "What's your name?" he asked. Names had power. Another of Morgana's teachings. But he'd entrusted me with his children, his wounds, his life. "Vesper," I said finally. "Vesper Thorn." He nodded as if confirming something. "Thane," he replied. "Though that's not what my people call me." "What do they call you?" His eyes held mine, and I saw something ancient and wild there, something that made my heart stutter.
King, he said simply.
And with that single word, the world tilted beneath my feet. I had brought home a king, a werewolf king, and his royal daughters. Somewhere in the darkness beyond my cabin, others would be hunting. I glanced at the babies sleeping peacefully, then back at Thane, who had finally surrendered to exhaustion. The ceremonial blade burned against my thigh, reminder of my grandmother's words. Our family protects. I hadn't known how far that protection might need to extend. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the distant sound of howling. Chapter 2. Silver in the Blood. Sleep came in fragments that night, my body curled on the rug beside the hearth, never more than an arm's length from the twins. Every creak of timber, every whisper of wind against the windows had me bolt upright, blade in hand, pulse hammering in my throat. The howling had stopped around midnight, but its echo remained, vibrating in my bones like the aftershock of an earthquake. Dawn broke pale and hesitant through the autumn mist. I stoked the fire and checked on my unlikely guests. The babies slept peacefully, their tiny chests rising and falling in perfect synchronicity, a silent language only twins understood. Thane's condition had deteriorated. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the morning chill. His skin burned beneath my palm, not the normal heat of werewolf metabolism, but fever. The bandages around his torso were soaked through with yellowish fluid that smelled of corruption. Silver poisoning. My grandmother's journals had mentioned it in passing, how the metal could fester in supernatural flesh, spreading like venom through the bloodstream. I'd thought it theoretical knowledge, something I'd never need to apply. Thane, I whispered, pressing a cool cloth to his forehead. Can you hear me? His eyes fluttered open, unfocused and fever-bright. Isabel, he murmured, reaching for my hand. You came back. I knew you would. The name pierced something in my chest. Isabel, the twins' mother, his mate. The longing in his voice was unmistakable, raw with grief and desperate hope. It's Vesper, I corrected gently, catching his searching hand. You're in my cabin. Your daughters are safe. Reality crashed back into his expression. His hand dropped away as if my touch had burned him. The silver, he said, voice barely audible. It's in my blood now. Spreading. I know. I need to draw it out. His eyes met mine, lucid now despite the fever. It will be painful. More painful than dying while your daughters watch. A humorless laugh escaped him.
No.
Nothing could be worse than that. I gathered what I needed. My sharpest knife, a bowl of salted water, black wax candles, and bundles of dried herbs tied with red thread. The ritual wasn't complex, but it required precision. And blood. I need to reopen the wounds, I explained, lighting the black candles and placing them around the bed in a specific pattern, north, south, east, west, and center. The silver has to be drawn out the same way it entered. He nodded once, jaw set. Do it. I worked methodically, reopening each gash with clean cuts, pressing the wounds until infected fluid ran freely into the bowl. Thane didn't make a sound, but his body went rigid, every muscle locked in silent agony. When all 5 wounds were draining, I packed them with a poultice of herbs, yarrow for blood flow, comfort for tissue repair, and something my grandmother had simply called Moon's Bane, which grew only in shadow and supposedly pulled corruption from supernatural flesh. Why? Thane asked as I wrapped fresh bandages. His voice was barely audible. Why help us when it puts you at such risk? The question caught me off guard. I busied myself cleaning up, avoiding his intense gaze that seemed to see too much. My grandmother believed our family had a purpose, I finally said. A duty to maintain balance between your world and mine. I gestured to the knife I'd used, its handle intricately carved with symbols. This has been passed down through generations of Thorn women. A family of protectors, he murmured, studying me with new interest. Rare even in the old days. There are stories among my people of human families with gifts, bloodlines that served as bridges between our worlds. Mediators, healers, peacekeepers. A shiver ran through me. Is that why your uncle wants you dead? Because you tried to bridge worlds by loving a human. His expression darkened.
Partly.
But power is the true motivation. Corbin has always resented that I took the throne. I was younger but stronger. The pack chose me. His hands clenched into fists. He's using my love for Isabel as an excuse, claiming I've tainted the bloodline, defied the natural order. But the twins are your blood heirs. Female heirs. Thane corrected, bitterness heavy in his voice. In our society, leadership passes to the strongest male. Without sons, my death means a power vacuum, one my uncle is eager to fill. That's archaic, I said flatly. A grim smile touched his lips. Many of our ways are. That's what Isabel and I hope to change. His eyes drifted to where his daughters slept. And now survival is all that matters. If Corbin becomes king, he'll hunt down anyone loyal to me. Destroy any evidence I ever ruled, including my daughters. A small sound interrupted us, one of the twins awakening with a hungry cry. I moved to them, gathering the dark-haired one first. What are their names? I asked, preparing the dropper with warmed milk. Thane's expression softened as he watched me tend his daughter. They haven't been named yet. Our tradition requires a naming ceremony at the first full moon after birth. His mouth twisted. A ceremony they were denied. I fed the crying baby, marveling at how fiercely she suckled, her tiny fingers curling against my hand. And their mother? Isabel? The silence that followed was absolute. When I glanced up, Thane's face had transformed into a mask of grief, so profound it stole my breath. Dead, he said flatly. She died bringing them into this world. Another reason the council wants my daughters destroyed. Half-human offspring, born to an alpha king whose mate died in childbirth. An ill omen, they said. Evidence that I had defied natural order. My arms tightened instinctively around the baby. That's barbaric. That's tradition. His voice was bitter. Our laws haven't changed in centuries. The Alpha King must mate with a werewolf woman of pure lineage. I knew this. Isabel knew this. We thought. He broke off, looking away. We thought love would be enough. That I could change things from within. The baby in my arms finished feeding, and I moved to burp her. The motion automatic, soothing. What happened instead? Civil war. The council elders, led by Corbin, declared me unfit to rule. Those loyal to me fought back. We were outnumbered. His voice roughened. My closest guards helped me escape with the twins, but they were killed covering our retreat. I should have died with them. Would have if you hadn't found us. The second twin began to cry, and I carefully placed the first beside her father before picking up the fair-haired one. As I fed her, I processed everything Thane had revealed. A king without a kingdom, hunted by his own people, protecting daughters who represented everything his society rejected. How long will they search for you? I asked quietly. Until they find proof of our deaths, he replied grimly. Or until a new Alpha King is crowned, my uncle, most likely. His expression darkened further. Corbin would burn the entire Valewood to eliminate any threat to his power. Then we need to leave, I said decisively. As soon as you're strong enough to travel. Thane's eyebrows rose. We. I met his gaze steadily. You'll never make it alone. Not with 2 infants and silver poisoning still in your system. I glanced around my small cabin, feeling the truth settle in my chest. Besides, I have nothing keeping me here. Since Morgana's death, I'd existed on the fringes of town, tolerated but never embraced, too strange with my herbs and solitary ways. The cabin, once a refuge, had become a prison of memories. They'll hunt you too, Thane warned. Once they discover you've helped me. I shrugged, trying to appear braver than I felt. Then we'd better not let them discover it. Over the next 3 days, I divided my time between nursing Thane back to health and caring for the twins. The silver poisoning receded gradually, each day bringing more color to his face, more strength to his limbs. By the 3rd night, he was able to sit up and hold his daughters, one nestled in each arm, his expression pure wonder. They have her eyes, he murmured, looking at the fair-haired twin. Isabel's eyes, blue as the summer sky. I smiled, watching them from across the cabin where I packed supplies for our journey. We decided to leave at dawn. The next town was 2 days' travel on foot, longer with infants and an injured werewolf. But Thane knew of a safe house there, owned by wolves loyal to him. "We'll need names for them," I said, folding blankets into my pack. Something to call them besides the twins. Thane looked up, considering. In our tradition, only a father can name his daughters. But it's customary for the one who delivers them safely into the world to suggest names for consideration. His eyes met mine. "You saved their lives, Vesper. You've earned that right." The honor of it warmed me unexpectedly. I moved closer, studying the babies' faces in the firelight. "This one," I said, touching the dark-haired twin's cheek. "She reminds me of twilight. Not quite night, but full of mystery and promise." "Celeste," Thane said softly. "It means heavenly in the old tongue." "Celeste," I repeated, tasting the name. It fit her, this solemn-eyed baby with her father's dark coloring. And her sister. I studied the fair-haired twin with her alert blue eyes that seemed to take in everything. She watches the world like she's already planning to conquer it. Brave even now. Raven, Thane decided. From the northern word for warrior protector. The fiercest of guardians. "Celeste and Raven," I whispered, feeling something shift in the air around us, as if the names themselves held power. "Perfect." Thane nodded, satisfied in his expression. It wasn't a formal ceremony, but something more intimate, a quiet acknowledgement of new beginnings amid chaos. Later, after the twins were asleep and our packs ready, Thane joined me by the fire. He moved stiffly but with growing confidence, the worst of his wounds finally healing. "Tell me about your grandmother," he said, settling beside me on the rug. "The woman who taught you our secrets." I poked at the fire, watching sparks rise. "Morgana Thorne. She raised me after my mother disappeared. I was just a baby myself." I smiled faintly. "Not much older than Celeste and Raven. You think your mother met one of us?" I shrugged.
"Possibly."
Grandmother always said Thorne women were drawn to boundaries between worlds. I glanced at him. She taught me everything she knew. Herbs, healing, old rituals. Said it was my birthright. "And the knife." Thane nodded toward where my ceremonial blade lay beside our packs. "Passed down through generations. Made from a special alloy, silver mixed with something else that renders it harmless to your kind when wielded by a Thorne woman." I smiled wryly. At least that's what grandmother claimed. I never had an occasion to test it before now. Thane's eyes gleamed in the firelight. "There are stories among my people of human families with gifts, bloodlines that served as bridges between our worlds. Mediators, healers, protectors." He studied me intently. "They're rare now. Most died out or forgot their purpose generations ago." A shiver ran through me. "Is that why Corbin wants to kill you? Because you tried to bridge worlds by loving a human?" His expression darkened.
"Partly."
"But power is the true motivation. In the 3 years I ruled, I began changing things, modernizing our laws, creating alliances with other packs, even building tentative bridges to the human world. Corbin would undo it all, return us to isolation and brutal tradition." Before I could respond, a sound froze us both. The distant crack of a branch breaking in the forest. Then another. Footsteps approaching, too heavy to be dear. Thane's head snapped up, nostrils flaring. "They found us," he whispered, voice tight with fear. "Corbin's trackers." I moved instantly to the twins, gathering them into my arms as Thane struggled to his feet. "How many?"
"3.
"Maybe 4. He inhaled deeply. "Armed with silver." My mind raced. We couldn't fight, not with Thane still weak and 2 infants to protect. Couldn't run. They'd catch us within minutes. That left only one option. A desperate gamble. "The cellar," I whispered, already moving toward the trapdoor hidden beneath my rug. "My grandmother built it as a sanctuary. The walls are lined with mountain ash and silver." Thane flinched. "Silver will weaken me further." It's mixed with iron and herbs designed to mask supernatural presence, not harm it. I shifted both babies to one arm and pulled the heavy door open, revealing narrow stairs descending into darkness. Quickly. As Thane made his way down, I handed the twins to him one by one, then grabbed our packs and my blade. Outside, the footsteps grew louder, accompanied now by low growls. Just as the first heavy thud landed against my door, I slipped into the cellar and pulled the trapdoor closed above us, sliding the iron bolt into place. Darkness enveloped us completely, broken only by faint red glow from dying embers in the small iron stove my grandmother had installed years ago. The twins, sensing danger, remained eerily quiet in their father's arms. Above us, my cabin door splintered open. Chapter 3. Ashes and Escape. The cellar air hung thick with dust, and the sharp scent of protective herbs embedded in the walls. I pressed a finger to my lips, though the gesture was unnecessary. Thane stood utterly still, breathing shallow. The twins clutched against his chest like the most precious cargo in existence. Above us, heavy footsteps crossed my cabin floor, followed by the crash of overturning furniture and shattering glass. Spread out, a deep voice commanded. The scent trail ends here. They can't be far, another replied, younger, eager. The fire's still warm. Fresh milk on the table. They left in a hurry. A third voice cut through, lower, more refined than the others, carrying unmistakable authority. Search everything. Corbin wants the king's body and the abominations. Thane's arms tightened around his daughters at that word. His jaw clenched so hard I could see the muscle jumping beneath his skin even in the dim red glow of the dying stove embers. I moved closer, one hand resting on the blade at my hip, the other curling around Thane's forearm in silent support. His skin burned with residual fever, but his stance remained solid. Protective. Unwavering. For nearly an hour, we remained frozen as the intruders tore my cabin apart overhead. I winced with each crash, each shattered memento of Morgana's legacy, her collection of clay jars, the hand-carved shelves, the portrait of her that had hung beside the hearth. But I kept my eyes fixed on Thane, marveling at his strength. Still recovering from near-fatal wounds, yet standing without trembling, protecting his children with absolute focus. Finally, the voices grew frustrated. Nothing. Not even a trail to follow. The protective circles outside. Someone knows our ways. A human ally, then. The refined voice, the leader, spoke with cold calculation. We'll burn it. If they're hiding nearby, smoke will drive them out. My heart stuttered. I'd prepared for many contingencies, but not this. Not flames consuming everything I had left of my grandmother. Thane must have seen the horror in my eyes, for his hand found mine in the darkness, fingers intertwining with surprising gentleness. I'm sorry, he whispered, his breath warm against my ear. I swallowed hard. Just things I forced myself to say.
We're alive.
That's what matters. The scent of smoke filtered through the floorboards moments later, followed by the unmistakable crackling of fire catching dry wood. The cellar would protect us from flames. Morgana had built it to withstand forest fires, but soon oxygen would grow scarce. There's a tunnel, I whispered, reluctantly pulling my hand from Thane's. My grandmother's escape route. It leads to a cave near the stream, half a mile away. I moved to the far corner of the cellar, feeling along the rough stone wall until I found the hidden latch. The door swung open with a groan, revealing a narrow earthen passage barely tall enough for Thane to navigate at a crouch. I'll go first, I said, lighting a small oil lamp I kept by the entrance. The tunnel branches twice. It's easy to get lost if you don't know the way. Thane nodded grimly, adjusting the twins in his arms. Celeste had begun to fuss, perhaps sensing the danger or responding to the acrid smoke now seeping into our sanctuary. Hurry, he urged. They'll check the perimeter once the fire's done its work. The tunnel was exactly as I remembered from childhood explorations, damp, close, with roots dangling from the packed earth ceiling and occasional supports of ancient timber that creaked ominously as we passed. I led the way with a flickering lamp, glancing back often to ensure Thane managed the awkward journey with his precious cargo. His face was set in grim determination, jaw tight against pain as he maneuvered through the low passage. "My grandmother built this during the Boundary Wars," I explained, keeping my voice low. "When humans first settled here, there were conflicts with your kind." "I know the history," Thane replied quietly. "The Thor name appears in our oldest records. Peacekeepers, when few wanted peace." The information surprised me. Morgana had never mentioned our family appearing in werewolf histories. What else had she kept from me? After what seemed like hours, but was likely only 20 minutes, the tunnel began to slope upward. Fresh air whispered through a crack ahead, carrying the scent of pine and moving water. I extinguished the lamp before pushing open the camouflage door, a slab of rock balanced on a hidden pivot point. Moonlight spilled into the tunnel, painting Thane's exhausted face in silver as he emerged behind me. We stood at the mouth of a small cave, concealed by a tangle of vines and ferns. The stream gurgled just yards away through the trees. Behind us, a distant orange glow lit the night sky. My cabin. My life. Burning to ash. "We need to move," Thane said, his voice rough with sympathy and urgency. "They'll search this area next." I nodded numbly, unable to tear my eyes from that distant glow. Everything I owned, everything I had of Morgana, her journals, her medicines, the few photographs, all of it gone. Grief rose sharp in my throat, but I forced it down. Later. I would mourn later. "The town is that way," I said, pointing north. "But they'll expect that. We should head deeper into the Valewood, circle around to reach the road on the far side." Thane studied me, concern evident even in the dim light. "You know these woods well." "Better than most." I shouldered my pack, grateful I'd had the foresight to prepare it earlier. Morgana made sure of that. We moved through the forest like ghosts, careful to leave minimal signs of our passage. Thane, despite his injuries and the twins, kept pace with surprising grace. His night vision proved invaluable, allowing us to navigate without light that might betray our position. The babies remained miraculously quiet, as if sensing the need for silence. Occasionally, Raven would whimper softly, and I would pause to help Thane feed her a few drops of milk from the small supply I'd packed. Celeste watched these proceedings with solemn eyes that seemed too aware for a newborn. Near dawn, we reached a ridgeline overlooking a narrow dirt road that wound through the valley below. Thane sank down against a boulder, exhaustion finally claiming him. The twins had fallen asleep, tiny faces peaceful against his chest. "We'll rest here until nightfall," he decided. "Less chance of being spotted in darkness." I nodded, dropping my pack and easing down beside him. Now that we'd stopped moving, the reality of our situation crashed over me with brutal force. Homeless. Hunted. Fleeing with a wounded werewolf king and his infant daughters into an uncertain future. My body trembled with delayed shock, teeth chattering despite the mild autumn morning. Without a word, Thane shifted closer, draping his arm around my shoulders. The heat of him was startling. Werewolves ran hotter than humans, apparently. I should have pulled away, maintained some boundary between helper and helped. Instead, I found myself leaning into his warmth, my head coming to rest against his shoulder. "I'm sorry," he said again, voice rumbling beneath my ear, "for bringing this destruction to your door." "You didn't choose to be hunted," I replied, watching the first golden rays of sunlight creep across the valley. "And I chose to help." "Why?" The question held genuine curiosity. Most humans would have left us to die. I considered the question, searching for an answer that made sense. "Maybe I'm not most humans," I finally said. "Or maybe I know what it's like to be an outsider. To be feared for being different." Thane was quiet for so long I thought he'd fallen asleep. When he finally spoke, his voice held a gentleness I hadn't heard before. In our old stories, there were humans who could walk between worlds. Those who understood both human and wolf. Bridgewalkers, my people called them. Rare, even then. His arm tightened slightly around my shoulders. "I think you might be one, Vesper Thorn." The words settled over me like a mantle, strangely comfortable in their weight.
Bridgewalker.
It explained the inexplicable pull I'd felt toward the forest boundary all my life. The knowledge Morgana had passed down seemed to come from somewhere beyond human experience. If I am, I said softly, I'm the last. My grandmother was the only family I had. And now. I swallowed hard, unable to finish the thought. Thane's hand found mine in the growing light. Not the last, he corrected gently. Not anymore. I looked up, startled by the implication, and found his amber eyes studying me with an intensity that sent heat flooding my cheeks. For a breathless moment, something electric passed between us, something that had nothing to do with gratitude or obligation. The moment shattered as Celeste stirred, her tiny face scrunching before she let out a hungry cry. I pulled away quickly, grateful for the interruption. I'll heat some milk, I said, digging through my pack for the small cooking pot. We all need food before we rest. While Thane soothed Celeste, I gathered kindling for a small, nearly smokeless fire, another of Morgana's teachings. As I worked, I fought to regain my equilibrium. Whatever I'd felt in that moment with Thane was dangerous. A complication we couldn't afford. He was a king in exile, still grieving his lost mate. I was a human with no home and no family. We were both focused on one priority, keeping Celeste and Raven safe. Everything else was irrelevant. By mid-morning, we had eaten a simple meal of bread, dried meat, and berries I'd gathered from nearby bushes. The twins had been fed, changed, and now slept soundly in a nest of blankets beneath the shade of a pine. Thane's wounds needed tending, so I carefully removed the bandages, relieved to find the infection retreating. New skin was forming along the edges of each gash, his supernatural healing finally reasserting itself. Your healing ability is returning, I observed, applying fresh herbal salve. The silver is finally leaving your system. He nodded, watching my hands as they worked across his torso. Thanks to you. After a pause, he added, You never asked how I became king. The non sequitur surprised me. I assumed you were born to it. Inherited the throne. A wry smile twisted his lips. Not quite. Among my kind, leadership isn't passed through bloodlines alone. Strength matters. When the old king, my father, died, I had to fight for the crown. His expression darkened. Corbin expected to win. He was older, more experienced. But I was faster, stronger. And now he wants revenge, I concluded, securing the fresh bandages. More than revenge. He wants to erase everything I've built. Thane's voice grew passionate. In the 3 years I ruled, I began changing things, modernizing our laws, creating alliances with other packs, even building tentative bridges to the human world. Corbin would undo it all, return us to isolation and the old brutal ways. I sat back on my heels, studying him. You loved her very much. Isabel. His eyes met mine unflinching.
Yes.
She was human, but she understood our world better than many born to it. A diplomat's daughter, raised in many cultures. She believed, as I do, that isolation has weakened us. He looked toward the sleeping twins. And now I fight for her daughters. For the future she wanted for them. The raw determination in his voice moved something deep within me. This wasn't just a father protecting his children. This was a king with a vision, a man willing to challenge centuries of tradition for what he believed right. I'll help you get there, I found myself promising. To your safe house. To your loyal pack. Whatever it takes. His eyes returned to mine, searching. It will be dangerous. Corbin won't stop. I'm already involved, I pointed out. My home is ashes. And I hesitated, then pushed forward with the truth. I need purpose, Thane. Since Morgana died, I've been existing, not living. This, helping you, protecting the twins, it matters. Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes. Among my people, saving a life creates a bond. You saved 3. By our oldest laws, that makes you family. The word family struck like a physical blow, dredging up years of loneliness. Family was what I'd lost when Morgana died. What I'd never had with the mother who abandoned me. To hear it offered so simply, as if it were already true, left me speechless. Thane's hand reached out, tucking a strand of pale hair behind my ear. The gesture was gentle, almost casual, yet it sent awareness sparking along my skin.
Rest, he said.
I'll keep watch. I should have argued. He needed recovery more than I did. But exhaustion pulled at me like an undertow, my body finally registering the night's trauma. Arranging myself on the ground near the twins, I used my pack as a pillow and closed my eyes. Just before sleep claimed me, I felt something settle over my shoulders. Thane's jacket, still warm from his body, carrying a scent of pine and wild things. A smile touched my lips as darkness swept me under. I woke to twilight and danger. Thane's hand covered my mouth, his eyes alert and focused on the road below. I followed his gaze and saw them. 3 figures moving along the dirt track, noses lifted to the wind. Even from this distance, there was something unnatural in their movements, too fluid and predatory to be human. Trackers. Thane breathed against my ear. Different ones. Corbin is casting a wide net. I nodded my understanding, and he removed his hand. The twins were awake but quiet, as if sensing the tension. I gathered our belongings silently, while Thane tested his mobility, checking his wounds. Can you fight if needed? I whispered. His expression was grim. Not at full strength.
But yes.
Let's hope it doesn't come to that. I shouldered my pack and lifted Raven into my arms while Thane took Celeste. We need to move deeper into the forest before crossing the road. There's an old ranger station 2 miles north. We can shelter there tonight. Thane nodded, and we retreated from the ridgeline, moving with painful slowness to avoid snapping branches or rustling leaves. The forest darkened around us as night fell in earnest, the first stars appearing overhead. Behind us, a howl rose into the night. Long, mournful, and unmistakably triumphant. They had found our scent. Run, Thane commanded, his voice urgent but controlled. We abandoned stealth for speed, plunging through the underbrush as more howls joined the first, closer now and converging. I clutched Raven against my chest, her tiny body trembling as we fled. My heart pounded painfully, legs burning as we tore through the darkness. Thane moved ahead, Celeste secured in one arm while his other hand cleared our path, breaking branches and shoving aside obstacles with supernatural strength. The stream, I gasped, veering right. If we cross, the water will mask our scent. We splashed through the icy current, the shock of cold water stealing my breath. On the far bank, Thane paused, listening intently. The howls had stopped, a worse sign than their continuation. It meant the trackers had switched to silent hunting mode, saving breath for the final chase. The ranger station? Thane asked, voice tight with urgency. I shook my head. Too obvious. There's a cave system nearby.
Morgana showed me.
Hidden entrance. Without waiting for response, I led the way, scrambling up a steep embankment that most would overlook. Near the top, concealed by a curtain of vines, a narrow opening split the rock face. I pushed through, Thane following close behind. The interior opened into a modest chamber, dry and surprisingly warm. Ancient paintings covered the walls, crude images of wolves and humans, some depicted with hands joined in what looked like a ceremony or a treaty. A sacred place, Thane breathed, recognition in his voice. From the time of the first covenants. Morgana called at the meeting place. I replied, setting Raven down gently to light the small lantern for my pack. Said it was neutral ground, protected by old magic. Thane studied the paintings, shifting Celeste to his shoulder. Your grandmother knew more than she told you, Vesper. So it seems. I arranged blankets for the twins, creating a makeshift bed. Once they were settled, I turned to Thane, whose expression had grown alarmingly grim. What is it? They'll find us, he said quietly. Even here. Corbin's trackers are the best. And there's only one exit. His eyes met mine. We're cornered. The reality crashed over me. We were trapped with 2 infants and no reinforcements. Thane was stronger, but nowhere near full capacity. And what could I offer against werewolf trackers trained to kill? My hand found the ceremonial blade at my hip, its weight suddenly significant. Morgana had a saying, "When cornered, become the corner." A ghost of a smile touched Thane's lips. Cryptic. She was fond of riddles. "I think I understand now," I said slowly. "We can't run anymore. So we fight, on our terms, not theirs." Thane's eyebrows rose. "You're suggesting an ambush. I'm suggesting we use what we have." I gestured to the cave paintings. Neutral ground protected by old magic. My knife passed through generations of boundary keepers. Your royal blood. The twins. Living proof that humans and werewolves can create something beautiful together. Understanding dawned in his eyes. A summoning of the old covenant. I nodded, though I was piecing together fragments of Morgana's teachings, making intuitive leaps. If we're lucky, it might buy us time. If not, I met his gaze steadily. At least we'll face them with dignity. For a moment, Thane studied me with an expression I couldn't decipher, something between wonder and weariness. Then he nodded once. "Tell me what to do." Chapter 4. Blood and Covenant. We worked quickly, arranging the cave according to the ritual patterns depicted in the wall paintings. My hands moved with certainty I didn't consciously possess, as if Morgana's knowledge flowed through my veins, guiding each placement. I positioned the twins at the center of a circle drawn with crushed herbs and salt from my pack, sage for protection, rosemary for remembrance, salt for purification. The symbols I traced around them were ancient, pulled from memory of Morgana's journals and something deeper, more instinctive. Thane took position before his daughters, guardian and father, his body a living shield. Despite his weakened state, he radiated authority, every inch the king he'd been born to become. I stood at his shoulder, blade drawn, its edge catching the lantern light and throwing strange shadows across the cave walls. The carvings on the handles seemed to pulse with warmth against my palm. Outside, the forest had gone deathly quiet. They were close. "Remember," I whispered, though my voice felt steadier than it had any right to be. "Whatever happens, protect the twins. They're what matters." Thane's hand caught mine, squeezing once. "You matter too, Vesper Thorn." Before I could respond, shadows darkened the cave entrance. 3 figures materialized from the night, moving with inhuman grace. The leader stepped forward, tall, aristocratic, with silver threading his dark hair and coldness radiating from his pale eyes. Even without introduction, I knew him instantly.
Corbin.
Thane's uncle, the would-be king. "Nephew," he greeted, voice smooth as polished stone. "How disappointing to find you still breathing." "Uncle." Thane's reply was equally measured, betraying none of the pain I knew still plagued him. "How predictable to find you still plotting." Corbin's gaze shifted to the twins, disgust twisting his features. "The abominations live as well." A situation easily remedied. His eyes finally landed on me, narrowing with interest. "And what have we here? A human ally. How characteristic of your misguided rule, Thane." I felt Thane tense beside me, but I kept my own expression neutral. Everything depended on timing now. "You stand on sacred ground," I said, voice steadier than I felt. "Neutral territory established in the first covenant. Violence here breaks the oldest of our shared laws." Surprise flickered across Corbin's face before his expression hardened. "Human, you speak of laws you cannot understand. This is pack business." "It's boundary business," I countered, raising my blade, so the markings caught the light. "I am Vesper Thorn, last daughter of the boundary keepers. By ancient right, I claim protection for these children and their father." A low murmur passed between Corbin's companions, recognition, perhaps even unease. The old stories weren't entirely forgotten, it seemed. Corbin, however, merely laughed. "Boundary keepers. Those human families died out generations ago. Your knife is a poor forgery. Your claim is meaningless." He stepped forward, teeth elongating slightly with growing anger. Stand aside or die with them. I held my ground, heart hammering against my ribs. The knife will prove my lineage. With deliberate movements, I sliced my palm, letting blood well up and drip toward the cave floor. The effect was instantaneous. The crimson drops didn't land. Instead, they hovered inches above the stone, suspended as if time itself had paused. The blood began to glow with inner light, soft at first, then building to brilliant gold that illuminated the entire chamber. Gasps echoed through the cave. Even Corbin stepped back, his certainty visibly shaken. Blood of the Covenant, Thane murmured behind me, awe evident in his tone. I moved forward, blade extended, my suspended blood drops orbiting around me like tiny stars. By ancient law, I demand trial by council. These children are under my protection until judgment can be rendered by a full gathering of the packs. It was a desperate gamble, pieced together from half-remembered tales Morgana had shared during my childhood. I had no idea if such councils still existed, or if the old laws held any power over modern werewolves. But the blood didn't lie. The Covenant magic recognized me. Corbin's eyes narrowed to dangerous slits. You dare invoke council law? A human. A boundary keeper, I corrected, gesturing to the cave paintings surrounding us, whose authority in such matters was established when the first treaties were written. I paused deliberately. Or have you forgotten your own history? Would be king? The title, or lack thereof, struck a nerve. Corbin's composure cracked, a growl rumbling from his chest. Clever words won't save you, human. Or my nephew's half-breed spawn. Perhaps not, came a new voice from the cave entrance, clear and commanding. But I believe mine might carry some weight. All heads turned as a figure stepped into the lantern light, an elderly woman leaning on an ornately carved staff, her silver hair bound in complex braids. Though small in stature, she carried herself with undeniable authority. The reaction from the werewolves was immediate. Corbin's companions dropped to one knee, heads bowed in deference. Elder Niev, Corbin acknowledged, noticeably less confident. This is an unexpected honor. I'm sure, she replied dryly, moving further into the cave. Her sharp eyes assessed the scene before landing on me. So, the last Thorn daughter has found her purpose at last. Your grandmother would be proud. I stared, speechless. This woman knew Morgana. Elder Niev turned to Thane, who had moved to stand protectively beside me. Young king, it seems you've survived Corbin's treachery.
Good.
The balance has been disturbed enough already. Corbin stepped forward. Elder, you cannot possibly support this abomination of our laws. He mated with a human. The children, Niev interrupted sharply, are innocent. And, according to the old laws, under the protection of a boundary keeper. She nodded toward me, toward my still hovering, glowing blood drops. The human has invoked council law correctly, Corbin. Even you cannot deny the blood ritual. Niev approached, examining the suspended blood with knowing eyes. Pure lineage, she murmured. Remarkable, after so many generations. She turned back to Corbin, her voice leaving no room for argument. The council will convene at the next full moon. Until then, King Thane and his daughters remain under Thorn protection. That is my ruling as First Elder. The authority in her voice was absolute. Corbin's face contorted with barely controlled rage, but he didn't dare challenge her directly. The council may rule differently, he warned, voice tight. They may, Niev agreed calmly. But they will rule fairly, without your interference. She fixed him with a steely gaze. Return to the territory, Corbin. Your trackers as well. Any further action against the king or his children before the council meets will be considered high treason. For a tense moment, I thought Corbin might attack despite the elder's presence. His hands clenched into fists, claws extending slightly. The air itself seemed to crackle with his barely restrained violence. Instead, he offered a stiff bow, as the First Elder commands. His cold eyes found mine once more, promising retribution. until the full moon human. With that, he retreated into the night, his companions following silently, their footsteps fading into the forest's whisper. Elder Niev waited until their presence vanished completely before turning to us with a weary sigh. Well, that buys us 2 weeks at most. My suspended blood drops finally fell, splashing against the stone in ordinary fashion. The golden glow faded, leaving only the lantern's warm light. My legs suddenly felt weak, the adrenaline draining away and leaving trembling exhaustion in its wake. "You knew my grandmother," I said, still trying to process everything that had happened. A smile softened Niev's weathered face. "Morgana and I were old friends, though we met rarely in recent years. The boundary between our worlds grew complicated." She moved to where the twins lay, studying them with gentle curiosity. "They're beautiful, Thane. Isabel would have been proud." Thane bowed his head respectfully.
"Thank you, Elder."
"Your timing was fortuitous." "Fortuitous?" Niev's eyes gleamed with knowing humor. "Child, I've been tracking you since you crossed into the Valewood. Did you think I wouldn't notice when my king went missing?" She tapped her staff against the stone. "I simply waited to see what the Thorn Girl would do." "You were testing me," I realized. "The blood doesn't lie, but character must be proven." Niev studied me thoughtfully. "You passed Vesper Thorn, not just by invoking the Covenant, but by standing between certain death and those you'd sworn to protect. Your grandmother trained you better than she knew." I wrapped a cloth around my cut palm, feeling the ache now that the ritual magic had faded. "What happens now?" "Now," Niev replied, "we get you all somewhere truly safe until the council convenes." She studied me with penetrating intensity. "You've chosen a difficult path, child. Standing with him means standing against many powerful werewolves who fear change." I glanced at Thane, who watched me with that same intensity that made my heart skip. Then to the twins, sleeping peacefully despite the danger that had nearly claimed them. "I've made my choice," I said simply. Niev nodded, approval in her ancient eyes. "Then we have much to do before the full moon rises." Elder Niev led us through moonlit forest paths that appeared and disappeared like shifting dreams. She moved with surprising speed for her apparent age, her staff tapping a steady rhythm against roots and stone. We traveled until dawn, the twins remarkably quiet in our arms, as if sensing the gravity of our journey. Finally, we reached a clearing where a modest cabin stood, smoke curling from its chimney in welcoming spirals. "My sanctuary," Niev explained, ushering us inside. "Protected by wards even older than those in the Covenant Cave. Corbin's trackers won't find you here." The interior was warm and welcoming, a stark contrast to the austere elder who had faced down Corbin with such authority. Herbs hung from rafters, books lined rough-hewn shelves, and the air smelled of pine and something sweeter, like honey and cloves. "You live between worlds," I observed, noting symbols carved into the door frames. Some I recognized from Morgana's teachings, others entirely foreign. As did your grandmother, though she chose to lean more toward the human side in her later years. Niev gestured for us to sit at a worn wooden table. "After your mother disappeared, Morgana became cautious." The casual mention of my mother sent a jolt through me. "You knew her too?" "My mother?" Niev's expression softened with something like regret. "Sienna Thorne. Brilliant, headstrong, much like you appear to be." She busied herself preparing tea, avoiding my gaze. She wasn't content with boundaries. "I want to understand both worlds completely." "What happened to her?" I asked the question I'd carried my entire life, finally finding a voice. Niev and Thane exchanged a look I couldn't interpret. "Perhaps that's a conversation for another time," Niev suggested gently. "After you've rested. You've all had a difficult journey." Frustration burned in my chest, but I nodded. The twins needed attention, and exhaustion pulled at my limbs like weights. Niev showed us to a small bedroom with a crib large enough for both babies and a bed that Thane immediately insisted I take. "I'll keep watch," he said, his tone brooking no argument. Too tired to protest, I helped settle the twins in their crib before collapsing onto the bed. Sleep claimed me instantly, deep and dreamless. I woke to afternoon sunlight and the soft murmur of voices. Following the sound, I found Thane and Niev at the kitchen table, heads bent over ancient-looking maps and documents. Between them sat my ceremonial knife, gleaming as if recently polished. "The council will challenge her lineage," Thane was saying. "We need proof beyond the blood ritual." "The records in the archive would suffice," Niev replied. "But reaching them—" She trailed off, noticing my presence. "Vesper, you rested well?" I nodded, joining them at the table. "The twins." "Fed and changed," Thane assured me. "They're sleeping again." I studied the documents spread before them, genealogies, treaties, maps of territories I'd never seen on any official chart. "You're planning for the council meeting." "Trying to," Niev confirmed. "Corbin will have prepared his arguments carefully. He'll claim Thane abandoned his duties, violated sacred mating laws, produced heirs that threaten werewolf bloodlines." "All false," Thane growled. "Truth matters less than perception," Niev countered. "Many on the council fear change. Corbin offers them a comfortable tradition, even if that tradition is based on isolation and prejudice." I traced the edge of one yellowed map. "And what do we offer?" Niev smiled approvingly at my use of we. "A vision of adaptation. Controlled, careful bridge building between worlds that have grown too separate." She studied me thoughtfully, with a boundary keeper to help maintain balance. The weight of responsibility settled over me. I know almost nothing about being a boundary keeper. Morgana taught me herbs and healing, rituals and stories, but never explained my true heritage. "She sought to protect you," Niev said gently. "After Sienna vanished, Morgana feared the same fate might befall you if you stepped too deeply into our world. And now—" I pressed. "Now," Thane said quietly, his eyes meeting mine with disturbing intensity. "You've already stepped through. There's no going back." The truth of his words resonated in my bones. The moment I'd helped him in the forest, the moment I'd invoked the covenant, I'd crossed a threshold. My old life, solitary, safe, small, was as burned as my cabin. "What happens if the council rules against you?" I asked. "Against the twins?" A heavy silence fell. Thane's expression grew grim. "If that happens," he said quietly, "we run. Find a place far from werewolf territories. Start over." The simplicity of his answer, the complete abandonment of his birthright, his kingdom, struck me deeply. For his daughters, he would give up everything. "There's another option," Niev said carefully, her ancient eyes moving between us. "One your grandmother never told you about, Vesper. A right of boundary keepers, rarely invoked." I raised an eyebrow. "Which is?" "Champion's right." Niev's voice was grave. "A boundary keeper may stand as champion for those under their protection. If the council rules against Thane, you could challenge that ruling through ritual combat. Your victory would override their decision." Thane's head snapped up. "Absolutely not. Vesper isn't fighting anyone." "It wouldn't necessarily be physical combat," Niev clarified. "The challenger chooses the form. Riddles, tests of endurance, trials of wisdom. But still dangerous, yes." "No," Thane repeated firmly. "We're not risking Vesper's life." "Shouldn't that be my decision?" I asked, surprised by the steel in my own voice. Thane's expression softened, but his jaw remained set. "Vesper, you've already risked everything for us. I won't ask more." "You didn't ask," I pointed out. "I'm offering." I turned to Niev, ignoring Thane's barely contained frustration. "What would it mean? Becoming a true boundary keeper?" The elder's eyes gleamed with approval. "It would mean standing between worlds, belonging fully to neither. Mediating disputes, upholding ancient covenants, protecting the balance." She paused meaningfully. "It can be a lonely path." I thought of my cabin, now ashes. Of the town where I'd never truly belonged. Of Morgana, who had lived her life on the edge of two worlds, never fully embracing either. Then I looked at Thane, this fierce, wounded king who had defied his people's oldest laws for love. At the twins, innocent and perfect in their mingled heritage. Something unfamiliar stirred in my chest. Not belonging exactly, but purpose. Connection. A reason to exist beyond mere survival. "I'll do what's necessary," I said simply. "But first, I need to understand my heritage completely. No more half-truths or protected ignorance." Niev nodded slowly. "Fair enough." She drew a deep breath. "Your mother didn't disappear, Vesper. She crossed over." "Crossed over," I repeated, confused. "She fell in love with a werewolf. Against all traditions, against her own mother's warnings, she chose his world over yours." Niev's eyes held mine steadily. "She still lives in the Northern Territory, with her mate and their children, your half-siblings." The revelation struck like lightning, reforming everything I thought I knew about myself. My mother,
Alive.
with a family that didn't include me. Why didn't she take me with her? The question emerged small, childlike. "You were fully human," Niev explained gently. "Born before she met her mate. The Northern Territory laws were strict then. No humans permitted, even children." Her expression filled with sympathy. She had to choose. And she had chosen her new family. The pain of that knowledge cut deep. But beneath it lay something else, understanding. Morgana's protectiveness, her insistence that I learn the old ways while keeping distance from the boundary. She had feared I would follow my mother's path, disappear into a world where I might never truly belong. Thane's hand found mine beneath the table, a silent offering of support. "Does she know I'm alive?" I asked. "That I grew up with her mother?" "Yes," Niev confirmed. "Morgana sent messages through me occasionally. Sienna couldn't respond without risking exposure, but she received them. I absorbed this, uncertain how to feel. Abandoned, yes, but also connected to a wider story than I'd ever imagined. The Northern Alpha," Thane said suddenly, straightening. "He's on the council." Niev's lips curved into a knowing smile. "Sienna's mate is the Northern Alpha's brother, which means, Vesper, you have an uncle on the council, one who might be persuaded to support his human niece and the progressive king she protects." For the first time since fleeing my burning cabin, hope flickered to life in my chest. "Can you reach him before the council meets?" I asked. "Better," Niev replied, her eyes twinkling. "We can bring him here, along with someone else who might prove useful in swaying council opinion." She paused for dramatic effect. "Your mother." Chapter 5. Bridges and Blood. The days that followed passed in a blur of preparation and revelation. Niev sent messages through channels I didn't understand, whispered words to birds that shouldn't have been able to comprehend human speech, symbols drawn in ash that vanished with the next breeze, carrying her intent to distant territories. While we waited for responses, Thane and I focused on caring for the twins and strengthening his healing body. Between feedings and diaper changes, Niev taught me the formal rituals and protocols of a boundary keeper, knowledge Morgana had withheld out of love and fear. Thane, too, became my teacher, explaining werewolf customs and hierarchy with patience and occasional humor. We fell into an easy rhythm, passing the twins between us, finishing each other's sentences, moving around Niev's small cabin as if we'd done so for years instead of days. Sometimes I would catch him watching me with an expression I couldn't quite name, something beyond gratitude or friendship. In those moments, heat would rise to my cheeks, and I would busy myself with some task, avoiding the implications of that gaze. He was still grieving Isabel. The twins still needed a safe future. And I was still finding my footing in this new reality where boundaries between worlds seemed increasingly permeable. One evening, a week after our arrival, I stood outside Niev's cabin watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of amber and rose. The twins were asleep. Thane was helping Niev prepare dinner. I had slipped out, seeking a moment of quiet to process everything. "You're troubled." Thane's voice came from behind me, followed by his presence at my side, solid and reassuring. I smiled faintly, just overwhelmed. A week ago, I was a strange hermit living alone in the woods. Now I'm a boundary keeper with werewolf relatives, preparing to address a council of supernatural beings. Regretting your choices? He asked, voice careful. No, I answered honestly. Just adjusting. We stood in comfortable silence, watching darkness claim the forest. In the distance, a lone wolf howled. An ordinary wolf, Thane assured me with a small smile. Not one of his kind. Vesper, he said finally, turning to face me. Whatever happens at the council meeting, I want you to know. A rustling from the trees cut him off. We both tensed, but Niamh's voice called out from the cabin doorway. It's all right. They've arrived. From the forest emerged 3 figures, Niamh, who had apparently slipped out while we were talking, and 2 strangers. The man was tall and broad-shouldered with silver-streaked dark hair and an air of authority similar to Thane's. His eyes glowed amber in the fading light, marking him clearly as werewolf. He carried himself like someone accustomed to command, to respect. The woman beside him made my heart stutter. Even in the dying light, I could see my own features reflected in her face. The same pale hair, though hers was threaded with silver. The same slight build. The same determined chin. She had aged since the single faded photograph Morgana had kept hidden in her journal, but there was no mistaking her. Sienna Thorne. My mother. She stopped several paces away, uncertainty written in every line of her body. Her companion, her mate, I realized, placed a supportive hand on her shoulder. Vesper, she breathed, my name falling from her lips like a prayer or a penance. 23 years of absence stretched between us, an ocean of unasked questions and unspoken hurts. I had imagined this moment countless times growing up, dreamed of what I might say if given the chance. The accusations I would hurl, the tears I would shed, the closure I would demand. In the end, I said nothing. I simply closed the distance between us and did what my heart had longed for since I was old enough to understand what mother meant. I wrapped my arms around her and held on. Her arms encircled me instantly, her body trembling with silent sobs. My daughter, she whispered against my hair. My beautiful daughter. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Behind us, I heard Thane quietly retreating to give us privacy. But I caught his eye over my mother's shoulder, saw understanding and compassion there that made my chest tighten with emotion I couldn't name. I thought about you every day, Sienna continued, her words tumbling out between sobs. Every single day. I wanted to come back, wanted to bring you with me, but the laws. I know, I said softly, surprising myself. Elder Niamh explained. You had to choose. She pulled back to look at me, tears streaming down her face. That doesn't make it right. Don't make it hurt less. For either of us. No, I agreed. But it makes it understandable. We stood there in the growing darkness, mother and daughter reunited after more than 2 decades. There would be time later for explanations and apologies, for sharing the years we'd missed, for deciding what kind of relationship we could build from these ashes. But in that moment, standing in my mother's embrace with Thane watching silently from the cabin porch, I understood what Niamh had meant about the loneliness of a boundary keeper's path. It wasn't about isolation. It was about choice. The choice to stand between worlds, to build bridges rather than walls, to find belonging not in one place, but in the connections we forge across divides. Later, after emotions had settled and introductions had been made, we gathered around Niamh's table. The man who'd accompanied my mother was named Finnick, her mate and, as Niamh had promised, brother to the Northern Alpha. He was gruff but kind, with laugh lines around his eyes and a protective gentleness towards Sienna that spoke of deep love. He studied me with open curiosity tinged with approval. You look like her, he said simply. But you have your grandmother's steel. Morgana was a formidable woman. You knew her too? I asked, beginning to realize how interconnected these worlds truly were. Met her twice, Finnick replied. Once when Sienna first crossed over, and once a few years later, when she negotiated safe passage for a human family fleeing persecution. He shook his head admiringly. She faced down 3 territorial alphas without flinching. Made them see reason through sheer force of will and ancient law. Sienna smiled softly at the memory. Mother was remarkable. I was so angry at her for years, for not supporting my choice to leave.
But now,
She looked at me, fresh tears threatening. Now I understand the impossible position I put her in, having to choose between her daughter and her granddaughter. She loved you both, Niev said quietly. And she died hoping you might someday meet as you have tonight. Thane had been silent throughout, sitting slightly apart with Celeste sleeping in his arms while Raven dozed against my shoulder. Now he spoke, his voice cutting through the emotional weight of reunion. The council meets in 1 week. What support can we count on? Finnick straightened, shifting into business mode. My brother will support you, Thane. The Northern Territory has always favored progress over tradition. Your reforms aligned with our values. How many others? Thane asked. The Western Pack Alpha will likely side with Corbin, Finnick admitted. She's an old guard and sees any change as a threat. The Eastern and Southern Territories are unpredictable, depends on how Corbin frames his arguments. He'll paint you as a traitor to your kind, Niev added. He'll use Isabel's death as evidence that human werewolf unions are doomed. He'll claim the twins represent contamination of pure bloodlines. And he'll attack Vesper's legitimacy as boundary keeper, Sienna said, her voice steadying as she focused on strategy. He'll argue the role died with Mother, that the old covenants no longer apply to modern pacts. The blood ritual proved her lineage, Thane countered. But can she prove she understands the role? Finnick asked not unkindly. The council will test her knowledge of covenant law, of boundary keeper responsibilities. Corbin will demand she demonstrate her authority. All eyes turned to me. I shifted Raven carefully, aware of the weight of expectations settling on my shoulders. Then I'll demonstrate it, I said with more confidence than I felt. Niev has been teaching me, and I have Morgana's journals, Elder. You said you rescued them from the fire? Niev nodded. I retrieved them the night we fled. They're in my study, along with other texts that might prove useful. I'll study every night until the council meets, I promised. I'll know covenant law better than Corbin himself. Thane's hand found mine under the table, a now familiar gesture of support. You won't face them alone. We stand together. As do we, Finnick added, glancing at Sienna, who nodded firmly. The Northern Territory stands with King Thane and his champion. 2 territories against potentially 3, Thane calculated. Not ideal odds. Which is why we need to sway at least one of the undecided territories before the council meets, Niev said. I suggest the Eastern Pack. Their alpha, Valen, is young and pragmatic. He might be persuaded by a personal appeal. I'll go, I said immediately. Absolutely not, Thane countered. Too dangerous. If Corbin learns you've left the sanctuary, he'll learn anyway once we appear at the council, I interrupted. At least this way we might gain an ally. I looked at Niev. The sanctuary's protection extends to those who leave, doesn't it? You mentioned wards of safe passage. Niev's eyes gleamed with approval. For those who know how to invoke them, yes. It would require blood magic, but you've already proven capable of that. Then I'll go to the Eastern Territory, I said firmly. Tomorrow. With proper warding, I can travel safely. Not alone, Thane said, his tone brooking no argument. If you go, I go. You're still recovering. I'm healed enough, he cut in. And you're right that we need allies. But I won't let you walk into potential danger without protection. The determination in his amber eyes told me arguing would be pointless. Besides, a small part of me, a part one wasn't ready to examine too closely, was relieved he'd be coming. What about the twins? I asked. They'll stay here, Sienna said immediately. With Finnick and me, we'll protect them with our lives. The offer hung in the air. Thane would have to trust his daughters to near strangers, to my mother who'd already abandoned one child, to an uncle-in-law he'd just met. But he looked at Sienna, really looked at her, and seemed to find something that satisfied him. Perhaps he saw the same fierce protectiveness I'd felt from her embrace, the desperate need to make amends by protecting her granddaughters. Thank you, he said simply. Both of you. We spent the rest of the evening planning. Neve drew maps of the Eastern Territory, marking safe paths and dangerous zones. Finnick shared what he knew of Alpha Valen's personality and political leanings. Sienna helped me pack supplies and taught me a few basic phrases in the old werewolf tongue that might prove useful. Through it all, I kept stealing glances at her. This woman who was my mother, but also a stranger. There was grief in her eyes every time she looked at me, but also pride and hope. We had lost so many years, but perhaps, if we survived the coming trials, we might build something new from the ruins. Near midnight, as the others began preparing for sleep, I stepped outside for one last breath of night air. Thane followed moments later, as I'd somehow known he would. "You don't have to do this," he said quietly. "We could run like I said. Find somewhere beyond Corbin's reach. And spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders?" I shook my head. Celeste and Raven deserve better. They deserve a world where they're not hunted for existing. "Our lives," he repeated, focusing on those specific words. I felt heat rise to my cheeks. "The twins' lives." "I know what you meant," he said, stepping closer. "But I heard what you said." In the moonlight, his features were both familiar and mysterious. This king who'd become father, exile, ally, and something more I wasn't ready to name. "Thane." "I loved Isabel," he said, cutting off whatever fumbling explanation I'd been forming. "She'll always be the twins' mother, my first mate." But she believed in building bridges, in finding connection across boundaries. His hand rose to cut my cheek, thumb brushing away a tear I hadn't realized had fallen. "And I think she would approve of the bridge we've begun to build. A werewolf king and a boundary keeper." "The council might accept your daughters," I whispered. "But this, us, would be another challenge entirely." "Then we'll face it," he said simply. "Together. If you're willing." In his eyes, I saw not just desire or gratitude, but recognition of shared purpose, shared strength, shared vision. Something deeper than conventional love, rooted in the ground we'd traversed together. "I'm willing," I whispered. "But after the council. After we know Celeste and Raven are safe." He nodded understanding, then did something that made my breath catch. He pressed his forehead to mine in a gesture that felt ancient, sacred. A promise without words. "After the council," he agreed. "But know this, Vesper Thorn, you're already family to me. To my daughters. No matter what the future holds." We stood like that for a long moment, foreheads touching, breathing synchronized, the space between us charged with possibility. Inside the cabin, I heard Celeste begin to fuss, her hungry cry breaking the spell. Thane pulled back with a rueful smile. "Duty calls." "Always," I agreed, but I was smiling too. We returned to the cabin together, ready to face whatever tomorrow would bring. The journey to the Eastern Territory awaited, and with it, the hope of allies who might tip the scales in our favor. But first, there were babies to feed and a long night of study ahead. Covenant law wouldn't learn itself, and I intended to be prepared for whatever challenges Corbin threw at me. As I settled at Neve's table with Morgana's journals spread before me, and Thane tending the twins by the fire, I felt something I hadn't experienced since my grandmother's death. Not just purpose, but belonging. A family forged not by blood alone, but by choice. By the bridges we built and the boundaries we chose to cross. And for the first time in years, the future felt like something worth fighting for. Chapter 6: The Eastern Journey. Dawn broke cold and clear, painting the forest in shades of silver and gold. I stood outside Neve's cabin, watching my breath mist in the morning air, while Thane finished his preparations inside. My pack was already secured, filled with supplies for a 3-day journey: dried meat, herbs, water skins, and Morgana's most essential journals wrapped carefully in oiled cloth. The ceremonial blade hung at my hip, its familiar weight both comforting and sobering. Today would test everything I'd learned, everything I'd become in the span of mere weeks. Behind me, the cabin door opened. Sienna emerged, carrying Celeste while Finnick followed with Raven. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed from a sleepless night, but her expression was resolute. "They'll be safe," she said, as much to herself as to me. I promise you, Vesper. I won't fail them the way She broke off, unable to finish. The way you didn't fail me, I said gently, surprising us both. You made an impossible choice, Mother. I understand that now. She reached out with her free hand, squeezing mine. Come back safely. We have so many years to make up for. I intend to, I replied, then looked down at Celeste, whose solemn dark eyes seemed to study me with unsettling awareness. Be good for your grandmother, little one. Thane emerged moments later, moving with the fluid grace of someone fully healed. The silver poisoning had finally left his system completely, restoring his supernatural strength. He wore traveling clothes, dark leather, and wool that would blend with the forest, and carried a pack similar to mine. He approached Sienna and Finnick, gazing at his daughters with an expression that made my chest tighten. If anything happens to us. Nothing will happen, Finnick interrupted firmly. But if the impossible occurs, your daughters will be raised knowing their father was a king who chose love over tradition. And their mother was a diplomat who believed in a better world. Thane nodded, throat working with emotion. He kissed each twin's forehead, whispering something in the old tongue too quiet for me to hear. Then he stepped back, jaw set with determination. Niamh emerged last, her staff in hand and a leather pouch at her belt. The warding, she said, approaching me. Give me your blade. I handed her the ceremonial knife. She nicked her own palm, letting blood well up, then drew symbols on the blade's surface, intricate patterns that glowed briefly before fading into the metal. This will mark you as under elder protection, she explained. Most werewolves will recognize and respect it, but Corbin's most fanatical followers might not care. She handed the blade back. Stay alert. Trust your instincts. And remember, a boundary keeper's greatest weapon isn't steel, but wisdom. Thank you, Elder, I said, sheathing the now warded blade. Niamh turned to Thane. Protect her, young king. She's more valuable to your cause than any army. I know, Thane replied quietly, his eyes finding mine. Believe me, I know. With final embraces and whispered blessings, we set out into the Valewood. The morning mist clung to the ground like spectral fingers, and every shadow seemed to hide potential threats. But Thane moved with confident purpose, leading us along paths I would never have found on my own. For the first hour, we traveled in companionable silence, both focused on covering ground quickly while remaining alert for danger. The forest around us gradually transformed from the familiar territory near Niamh's sanctuary to wilder, older growth, trees with trunks wide as houses, their branches forming cathedral-like canopies overhead. Tell me about Alpha Valen, I said finally, breaking the silence. What should I expect? Thane glanced back at me, adjusting his pack. Valen is young for an alpha, only 30, which is barely more than adolescent by our standards. He took leadership 5 years ago when his father died in a territorial dispute. With Corbin's faction?
No, actually.
With rogue wolves from the Western Territory. Thane ducked under a low-hanging branch. That's partly why we have hope he might support us. He's seen firsthand the cost of traditionalist rigidity. His father died because he refused to adapt hunting territories to account for human expansion. So Valen favors modernization? Pragmatism, more accurately, Thane corrected. He's not idealistic about human-werewolf relations, but he recognizes that isolation isn't sustainable. Our worlds are too interconnected now. We crested a ridge, and Thane paused to survey the valley below. The challenge will be convincing him that supporting a half-blood king with a human boundary keeper isn't political suicide. In other words, we need to prove we're worth the risk. Exactly. He resumed walking, and I fell into step beside him. Valen respects strength and intelligence. He won't be swayed by emotional appeals or abstract principles. We need concrete arguments about why our way forward benefits his territory specifically. I considered this as we descended into the valley. Finnick mentioned trade routes. The Northern Territory has been successfully trading with human settlements for years. And prospering because of it, Thane confirmed. While isolated territories struggle with resource scarcity. That's our opening. demonstrate that bridges between worlds create opportunity, not weakness. We walked for several more hours, pausing only briefly to eat and drink. Thane's knowledge of the forest was impressive. He navigated by subtle signs I would have missed, reading the landscape like a language only he understood. As afternoon shadows lengthened, I noticed him growing tense, his movements more cautious. "What is it?" I whispered. "We're entering the border region between territories," he replied quietly. "Neutral ground, technically, but patrolled by both Eastern and Northern scouts. We don't want to appear threatening." He pulled something from his pack, a cloth embroidered with symbols I recognized from Niamh's cabin. "A peace banner," he explained, tying it to a long branch. "It signals we come for parley, not conflict." We continued more slowly now, Thane carrying the banner prominently. The forest seemed to hold its breath around us, birds falling silent, and even the wind dying to stillness. Then I heard it, the soft pad of footsteps moving parallel to our path. Not trying to hide, but not announcing themselves either. "Watching. Evaluating. Eastern scouts," Thane murmured. "3 of them. Stay calm." My hand instinctively moved to my blade, but I forced myself to relax. This was exactly what we'd hoped for, contact with Valen's wolves. The footsteps drew closer, and 3 figures emerged from the underbrush. All male, all carrying themselves with predatory grace. The leader was younger than the others, with copper-colored hair and shrewd green eyes that assessed us with calculating intensity. "King Thane," he said, voice neutral but not hostile. "You're far from Silverborn territory, and traveling under a peace banner, I see." "I seek an audience with Alpha Valen," Thane replied formally, "on a matter of council business." The scout's eyes shifted to me, narrowing slightly. "And your companion?" "Vesper Thorn," I said before Thane could answer. "Boundary Keeper. I also seek an audience with your Alpha." Surprise flickered across the scout's face. "Boundary Keeper? Those are extinct." "Not extinct," I corrected, raising my blade, so the Elder's warding symbols were visible. "Simply dormant. The old covenants have been reawakened." The scout studied the symbols, recognition dawning. He exchanged glances with his companions, some silent communication passing between them. "Alpha Valen should see this himself," he decided. "You'll come with us. But know that any hostile action will be met with immediate force." "Understood," Thane agreed. "We come in peace." The scouts formed a loose escort around us, not quite prisoners, but certainly not free to leave. They led us deeper into Eastern territory, along paths that wound through increasingly dense forest. As we walked, I caught glimpses of the territory's inhabitants, werewolves in various forms, some human-looking, others allowing partial shifts that gave them Lupin features. Children played in clearings under watchful eyes, and I saw structures built seamlessly into the landscape, wooden homes that seemed to grow from the trees themselves. It was beautiful in a wild way, and I found myself understanding why someone like Sienna might have chosen this life. There was a freedom here, a connection to nature that human settlements had long since abandoned. After an hour's walk, we reached a central gathering place, a large circular clearing surrounded by ancient oaks. At its center stood a wooden hall, its architecture both primitive and elegant, carved with symbols that reminded me of the Covenant Cave. The copper-haired scout approached the hall's entrance, speaking quietly to guards posted there. Moments later, a figure emerged that commanded immediate attention. Alpha Valen was tall and lean, with dark hair pulled back in a leather tie and eyes the color of storm clouds. He couldn't have been much older than Thane, but he carried himself with the weary wisdom of someone who'd shouldered responsibility too young. "King Thane," he greeted, his voice measured. "This is unexpected. I'd heard rumors of your exile, even your death." "Greatly exaggerated, as you can see," Thane replied with a slight smile. "I apologize for arriving unannounced, but circumstances have been complicated." Valen's eyes moved to me, assessing. "And you bring a human into my territory. Bold, considering current politics." "Not just a human," I said, stepping forward. "A boundary keeper. Vesper Thorn," last of my line. I raised my palm, and without thinking, drew on the same instinct that had activated the blood ritual in the Covenant Cave. My pulse quickened, and I felt power surge through my veins, ancient, primal, undeniable. A drop of blood welled up without me cutting myself, rising from my palm to hover in the air, glowing with golden light. Gasps rippled through the gathered werewolves. Even Valen's composed expression cracked, revealing shock. "Impossible," he breathed. "The Boundary Keeper bloodlines died out generations ago." "Dormant," I corrected, letting the blood drop. "Not dead. The Covenant still binds our peoples, Alpha Valen. And I've come to remind you of its terms." Valen stared at me for a long moment, then glanced at Thane. "You've aligned yourself with the Boundary Keeper. This changes things considerably." "That's what we're hoping for," Thane said. "May we speak privately? What we have to discuss concerns the upcoming council meeting and the future of all our territories." Valen considered this, then nodded slowly. "Very well. But I make no promises, King Thane. My priority is my pack's welfare, not ancient politics." "That's all I ask," Thane replied. "The chance to show you that our interests align." Valen gestured toward his hall. "Then let's talk." As we followed him inside, I caught Thane's eye. He gave me a slight nod of approval, and I felt a surge of confidence. The first hurdle was crossed. Now came the real challenge, convincing a pragmatic alpha that supporting an exiled king and his half-blood daughters was worth the political risk. Inside the hall, surrounded by Valen's advisors and guards, we would make our case. And the future of Celeste and Raven, perhaps the future of human-werewolf relations itself, would hang in the balance. Valen's hall was surprisingly sophisticated inside, wooden beams carved with intricate patterns, maps covering the walls, and a central fire pit that cast dancing shadows across everything. We sat around a low table, Thane and I on one side, Valen flanked by 3 advisors on the other. "Speak plainly," Valen said without preamble. "What do you want from the Eastern Territory?" "Your support at the council meeting," Thane replied directly. "Corbin will argue for my continued exile and the execution of my daughters. I need allies who'll stand against him." "And why should I risk Corbin's wrath for you?" Valen's tone wasn't hostile, merely curious. "Your reforms were admirable, but they also destabilized traditional power structures. Some might argue you brought this on yourself." "Some might," Thane acknowledged. "But ask yourself this. What future do you see for isolated territories? The human world grows larger every year. Their cities encroach on our hunting grounds. Their technology makes it harder to remain hidden." He leaned forward intently. "We can either adapt and find ways to coexist, or we can fight a losing battle against inevitability." One of Valen's advisors, an older woman with silver streaking her dark hair, spoke up. "Coexistence sounds ideal in theory. In practice, it means compromise. Giving up our ways to accommodate theirs." "Not giving up," I interjected.
Evolving.
The Boundary Keepers existed precisely to help both sides navigate that evolution, to protect what's essential while adapting what's necessary. "And what makes you qualified to determine what's essential?" the advisor challenged. I met her gaze steadily. Generations of knowledge passed through my bloodline. The covenant laws that were written when our peoples first learned to share territory. And the lived experience of being born between worlds, human by birth, but raised with understanding of yours. "Your mother crossed over, didn't she?" Valen said suddenly. "Sienna Thorne. I've heard the story. She abandoned her human life for love of a Northern Territory wolf." "She did," I confirmed, feeling the familiar ache. "And she paid a price for it, losing her mother, her daughter, her human connections. But she also helped build bridges. The Northern Territory's success with human trade routes? That's partly her doing." Valen's expression shifted, interest sharpening. "Go on." "Finnick's brother, the Northern Alpha, can detail the economic benefits better than I can," I said. "But the basic reality is this. Isolation equals scarcity. The Northern Territory has access to human goods, human medicine, and human technology. They're thriving while traditionalist territories struggle. At what cost? The silver-haired advisor pressed. Dilution of our bloodlines? Loss of our cultural identity? At the cost of flexibility, Thane answered. And yes, that includes accepting that some wolves will choose human mates. Some will have half-blood children. But those children aren't threats, they're assets. They can move between worlds in ways pure-blooded wolves cannot. He paused, letting that sink in. My daughters will grow up understanding both humans and wolves. They'll be able to negotiate, to translate, to bridge gaps that would otherwise lead to conflict. That's not contamination. That's evolution. Valen was silent for a long moment, his storm-colored eyes distant with thought. Finally, he spoke. Corbin will have counterarguments. He'll say your mate's death proves humans and wolves aren't meant to mix. That your daughter's very existence is an abomination against nature. Isabel's death was a tragedy, not an omen, Thane said quietly. Childbirth complications can happen to any woman, human or wolf. Corbin twists it to serve his narrative, but it proves nothing except that life is fragile and loss is universal. He'll also argue, Valen continued, that a king with a human boundary keeper as advisor, or more, represents the exact kind of compromise that weakens us. The way he said, or more, suggested he'd noticed the connection between Thane and me. I felt heat rise to my cheeks, but forced myself to maintain composure. A king with a boundary keeper as ally, I corrected, represents the covenant as it was meant to function. Our peoples were never supposed to be completely separate. That's why the boundary keepers existed, to maintain balance, not division. Valen turned to his advisors. Thoughts. The silver-haired woman spoke first. The boundary keeper's blood ritual is undeniable. If she truly carries the old authority, then covenant law does still apply. That complicates Corbin's position significantly. Another advisor, younger with amber eyes, added, the economic argument has merit. We've struggled with resource management. Access to human trade goods would ease that burden. The third advisor, a grizzled man with scars across his face, simply grunted. I fought beside Thane's father in the Western Territory conflicts. The son has his courage and his vision. That counts for something. Valen absorbed this, then stood, pacing to the fire pit. We all waited in tense silence while he thought. If I support you, he finally said, turning back to face us, I'm not just risking Corbin's anger. I'm betting the Eastern Territory's future on your ability to deliver the world you're promising. Trade routes. Peaceful coexistence. A new balance. I understand, Thane said. Can you deliver? Valen asked bluntly. Or are you just a desperate king making empty promises to save his daughters? The question hung heavy in the air. Thane met Valen's gaze, without flinching. I can deliver, he said. Not overnight. Not without challenges. But yes, I can build what I'm describing. Especially with a boundary keeper to help navigate the complexities. Valen looked at me. And you? Can you truly function as a bridge between our worlds? Or will you choose one side over the other when it matters? I thought of Morgana, who'd lived her whole life walking that line. Of Sienna, who'd chosen the wolf world completely. Of myself, standing here between an exiled king and a cautious alpha, trying to forge a future that honored both halves of my heritage. I won't lie and say it will be easy, I said honestly, or that I won't make mistakes. But I'm committed to balance, not favoritism. That's what boundary keepers do. We hold the center, so both sides have room to grow. Valen studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I'll support you at the council, he decided. With conditions. Relief flooded through me, but Thane's expression remained cautious. What conditions? First, if you regain your throne, the Eastern Territory gets priority access to any trade agreements you establish with human settlements. Second, you'll guarantee that half-blood wolves have the right to join any pack that will accept them, including mine. And third, he paused meaningfully. The boundary keeper trains an apprentice from my territory. Someone who can serve as a secondary bridge if something happens to her. I glanced at Thane, who nodded slightly. These were reasonable terms and we both knew it. Agreed, Thane said. On all counts. Valen extended his hand, and Thane clasped it, the formal gesture of alliance between alphas. Then you have the Eastern Territory support, Valen declared. May the ancestors judge us wise rather than foolish. Thank you, I said sincerely. You won't regret this. I hope not, Valen replied. For all our sake. We stayed in the Eastern Territory that night as Valen's guests. A small cabin was provided, and for the first time since fleeing my burning home, Thane and I had genuine privacy. After a simple meal, we sat by the cabin's fire, exhaustion and relief warring in both of us. One territory secured, I said, watching flames dance. One more to sway before the council meets. Two secured, Thane corrected. Northern Territory was already with us. And now Eastern. That's two against Corbin's certain one, the Western Territory. The Southern Territory becomes the tiebreaker. Can we reach them before the council? Thane shook his head. The Southern Alpha is notoriously reclusive. She won't meet with anyone before official council proceedings. We'll have to make our case there. Then we'd better make it good. We will, Thane said with quiet confidence. He turned to face me fully. Vesper, what you did today, the blood ritual, the way you spoke to Valen, you were born for this role. I smiled faintly. I'm making it up as I go, mostly. Following instinct and hoping I don't get us all killed. That's what leadership is, he replied. Trusting yourself when there's no clear path forward. His hand found mine, fingers intertwining. I'm glad you're beside me. Where else would I be? I asked softly. His thumb traced circles on my palm, the gesture both soothing and electric. After the council. After we know the twins are safe. Can we talk about what this is? What are we becoming? My breath caught. Thane. I know it's complicated, he continued. I know I come with baggage, a dead mate, 2 daughters, a kingdom in chaos. But I also know that what I feel for you isn't just gratitude or convenience. He paused, searching for words. It's recognition. Like finding a piece of myself I didn't know was missing. Tears pricked my eyes. I feel it too, I whispered. But I'm terrified. What if the council rules against us? What if I can't be what you need, what the twins need? Then we'll face it together, he said simply. That's all I'm asking, Vesper. Not certainty, just willingness to try. I looked into his amber eyes, seeing reflected there all the hope and fear I carried in my own heart. We were 2 broken people trying to build something whole. 2 outcasts forging a family from nothing. 2 bridge builders spanning an ancient divide. After the council, I promised. We'll figure out what we are, what we could be. He raised our joined hands to his lips, pressing a kiss to my knuckles. After the council, he agreed. Outside, wolves howled in the distance, Eastern Territory patrols marking boundaries and keeping watch. Inside our borrowed cabin, Thane and I sat by the fire, hands clasped, hearts aligned, preparing for the battle ahead. 3 more days until the full moon. 3 more days until the council would decide our fate. We would face it together, boundary keeper and king, building bridges even as others tried to burn them down. And somehow, impossibly, I believed we might actually win. Chapter 7. The Council Gathers. We returned to Niav's sanctuary 2 days before the full moon, traveling swiftly through territory that felt simultaneously familiar and foreign. The forest seemed to pulse with anticipation, as if the trees themselves knew something momentous approached. Sienna met us at the door, relief flooding her features. Thank the ancestors. I was beginning to worry. The twins? Thane asked immediately. Perfect, she assured him, stepping aside so we could see into the cabin. Celeste and Raven lay sleeping in their crib, slightly bigger than when we'd left, their tiny faces peaceful. Thane moved to them immediately, kneeling beside the crib with an expression of such profound love it made my chest ache. He touched each small head gently, whispering words in the old tongue. Blessings, I thought, or perhaps promises. Finnick emerged from the back room, nodding and greeting. How did it go with Valen? He's with us, I reported. With conditions, but reasonable ones. That's 2 territories secured then, Finnick said with satisfaction. Better odds than I'd hoped for. Niamh appeared moments later, her ancient eyes assessing us both with knowing intensity. You've grown into your role, Vesper Thorn. I can see it in how you carry yourself. I hadn't noticed any change, but perhaps she was right. The uncertain girl who'd fled a burning cabin felt like someone from another lifetime. In her place stood someone who'd invoked covenant law, swayed a territorial alpha, and accepted the weight of an ancestral calling. The council meets tomorrow night, Niamh continued. At the gathering grounds, under the full moon. We should discuss strategy. We gathered around the table. All of us now, a makeshift alliance bound by shared purpose. Niamh spread out a hand-drawn map, showing the gathering grounds, a circular clearing marked with standing stones. The council consists of 5 alphas, she explained. Northern, Southern, Eastern, Western, and Central. That's Corbin's territory now, as he's claimed leadership in Thane's absence. Claimed, not earned, Thane growled. Semantics the council will debate, Niamh said. What matters is the vote. You have Northern and Eastern confirmed. Western will almost certainly vote against you. Alpha Bronwyn is an old guard, fears change more than death itself. That leaves Southern and Central, I said. Corbin's vote is guaranteed against us. So, everything depends on the Southern Alpha. Alpha Odette, Finnick supplied. Reclusive as Thane mentioned, but shrewd. She ruled the Southern Territory for 40 years, surviving 3 challenges to her leadership. She won't be easily swayed by emotional appeals. What will sway her? I asked. Niamh smiled grimly. Proof that supporting Thane benefits her territory specifically. And demonstrate that you're a legitimate boundary keeper, not a pretender. The blood ritual was impressive, Niamh interrupted. But Corbin will argue it was a trick, stagecraft designed to deceive. You'll need to prove your knowledge of covenant law, demonstrate practical application of boundary keeper authority. A chill ran through me. You mean a trial? Most likely, Niamh confirmed. Corbin will demand it. And by covenant law, you cannot refuse such a challenge when your legitimacy is questioned. Thane's hand found mine under the table. What kind of trial? That depends on what Corbin chooses, Niamh said. Could be a test of knowledge, reciting covenant law passages. Could be a practical demonstration, resolving a boundary dispute. Or, she paused meaningfully, could be trial by ordeal. Which is? I pressed. Physical or magical challenge, Finnick explained, his expression grave. Designed to test whether you truly carry boundary keeper blood or are merely skilled with herbs and rituals. Sienna reached across the table, gripping my other hand. There must be a way to prepare her. Mother's journals will help, Niamh agreed. But ultimately, Vesper must trust her instincts. The boundary keeper gift isn't purely learned, it's inherited, awakened through blood and purpose. Then it's already awakened, Thane said firmly. I've seen what she can do. Corbin's trial, whatever it is, won't break her. His confidence bolstered me, even as fear coiled in my stomach. Tomorrow night, under the full moon's witness, I would face the gathered alphas and prove myself worthy of a title I'd only recently learned existed. What about the twins? I asked. Will they need to be present? Yes, Niamh said regretfully. As the subjects of the council's judgment, they must be there. But they'll be protected. Council law forbids violence against the innocent during proceedings. Corbin respects council law when convenient, Thane said bitterly. Which is why I'll be there, Finnick assured him. And Sienna. And every loyal wolf we can muster. Corbin won't dare break a covenant openly, not with so many witnesses. We spent the rest of the evening preparing. Niamh drilled me on covenant law passages until my head spun with ancient terminology and legal precedents. Thane worked with Finnick on political strategy, identifying potential arguments and counterarguments. Sienna prepared ritual components, herbs, oils, symbolic items that might prove useful. As midnight approached, exhaustion finally claimed us. Sienna and Finnick retired to the spare room. Niev to her private quarters. That left Thane and me in the main room with the twins. We worked together in comfortable silence, changing diapers and warming milk, the domestic routine soothing after the day's intensity. Celeste fed eagerly, her dark eyes watching me with that unsettling awareness. Raven was more peaceful, drifting off mid-feeding, milk-drunk and content. "They're so innocent," I whispered, placing Raven back in the crib. "They don't understand what tomorrow means." "No," Thane agreed, settling Celeste beside her sister. "But they will someday. And I want them to know we fought for their right to exist, to be who they are without shame." He straightened, turning to face me. In the firelight, his features were sharp and beautiful, exhaustion evident, but determination unshaken. "Vesper, whatever happens tomorrow, we'll face it together," I interrupted, stepping closer.
You keep saying that.
"I'm starting to believe it." A slight smile touched his lips. "Good, because I mean it. Not just tomorrow, but after. I want—" He paused, choosing words carefully. "I want a future with you. With the twins. A family built on choice, not just necessity." My heart raced. "Thane, that's not something we need to decide right now." "I know," he said softly. "But I need you to know it's what I want. So that whatever you face tomorrow, you understand you're not fighting for abstract principles or strangers. You're fighting for us. For what we could build together." Tears stung my eyes. That's a lot of pressure. It's also the truth. His hands cupped my face, thumbs brushing away tears I hadn't realized had fallen. "And I think you're strong enough to carry it." I rose on tiptoe, and this time when our foreheads pressed together, I closed the remaining distance. Our lips met softly at first, tentative, questioning, then deeper as we both surrendered to what had been building between us since that first desperate night in my cabin. The kiss tasted of hope and fear, promise and uncertainty. It was a bridge itself, spanning the gap between grief and healing, between duty and desire. When we finally pulled apart, breathless, Thane rested his forehead against mine. "After the council," he whispered. "After the council," I agreed. "We'll figure out what this is. What we are." "I already know what we are," he said. "The question is whether you're ready to accept it." Before I could respond, Celeste let out a small cry. We broke apart, the moment shattered but not forgotten, and tended to his fussing daughter together. Later, lying on a pallet near the fire while Thane kept watch, I stared at the ceiling and tried to calm my racing thoughts. Tomorrow would determine everything: the twins' future, Thane's throne, my role as boundary keeper, and the fragile connection growing between us. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of standing stones and amber eyes, of blood that glowed like starlight and voices chanting in languages I almost understood. I woke before dawn to find Thane still awake, sitting by the twins with an expression of such fierce protectiveness it made my throat tight. This was what we fought for, not crowns or titles, but the simple right for a father to raise his daughters without fear. "Ready?" he asked softly, sensing I was awake. "No," I admitted, "but I'll do it anyway." He smiled. "That's all courage ever is. Doing what terrifies you, because it matters." As the sun rose on the day of the full moon council, I held onto those words like a talisman. The gathering grounds lay deep in neutral territory, a place so ancient even the trees seemed to bow in reverence. Standing stones formed a perfect circle, each carved with symbols that predated written language. At the circle's center, a flat stone altar stood beneath the open sky. We arrived as dusk painted the horizon in shades of blood and gold. Already, dozens of werewolves had gathered, not just the alphas and their immediate advisors, but witnesses from every territory. The crowd parted as we entered, whispers following our passage. Thane walked with his head high, every inch the king despite his exile. He carried Celeste while Sienna held Raven. Finnick and I flanked them, a united front. Niev led our procession, her staff tapping a steady rhythm against the earth. The 5 alphas stood waiting near the central altar. I recognized Valen immediately, his storm-colored eyes meeting mine with subtle encouragement. Beside him stood a tall man with silver hair, the Northern Alpha, Sienna's brother-in-law, whose nod acknowledged our connection. The Western Alpha matched Niamh's description perfectly. Bronwyn was ancient by werewolf standards, her face lined with age, but her eyes sharp with suspicion. She watched our approach with open disapproval. The Southern Alpha, Odette, was harder to read. She appeared middle-aged by human standards, with auburn hair and features that suggested both beauty and danger. Her expression revealed nothing. And then there was Corbin. He stood at the altar's head, claiming the position of authority. His cold eyes fixed on Thane with undisguised hatred, then shifted to me with something worse, contempt mixed with curiosity. "The exile returns," Corbin announced, his voice carrying across the gathering. "How unexpected." "I'm no exile," Thane replied calmly. "I'm the rightful king of the Central Territory, here to answer false charges before the council." "False." Corbin's laugh was cruel. "You mated with a human in defiance of sacred law. Your union resulted in death and abomination. Those are facts, not charges." "My union resulted in love and 2 beautiful daughters," Thane countered. "The only abomination here is your attempt to murder innocents for political gain." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Corbin's face darkened with rage, but Niamh's staff struck the ground with a resounding crack. "Enough," the elder commanded. "This council convenes under covenant law. Personal grievances will be set aside while we conduct proper proceedings." Her gaze swept the assembled werewolves. "I call this gathering to order under the light of the full moon. Let the ancestors witness our judgment and guide our wisdom." A hush fell over the gathering grounds. Above us, the moon rose, huge and luminous, bathing everything in silver light. "The matter before us," Niamh continued, "concerns the legitimacy of Thane's Silverborn's rule and the fate of his half-blood daughters. Secondary to this is the claim of Vesper Thorn to be the last living boundary keeper." "A claim easily disproven," Corbin interjected. "The boundary keeper bloodlines died out generations ago. This human is a fraud, using tricks and stagecraft to deceive us." "Then you wish to challenge her legitimacy?" Niamh asked. "I do," Corbin said firmly. "I invoke the right of trial by ordeal. Let her prove she carries true boundary keeper blood." Niamh turned to me. "Vesper Thorn, do you accept this challenge?" My mouth went dry. Every eye in the gathering fixed on me, waiting. I felt Thane's presence at my back, solid and supportive. Felt the weight of Morgana's blade at my hip. "I accept," I said, my voice carrying farther than I'd expected. Corbin's smile was predatory. "Excellent. I propose the trial of binding, an ancient test where the challenger must restrain a werewolf in full shift using only boundary keeper authority. No weapons, no physical force. Just the power of covenant law." Murmurs swept through the crowd. Even Niamh looked troubled. "That trial hasn't been invoked in centuries," she said carefully. It requires a legitimate boundary keeper," Corbin finished. "Which is precisely what we're testing. Unless the human wishes to withdraw her claim?" He was baiting me, hoping fear would make me retreat. But I thought of Celeste and Raven, of Thane, and everything we'd built together. Of Morgana's journals and the knowledge flowing through my veins. "I won't withdraw," I said firmly. "When do we begin?" Corbin's smile widened.
Now.
"And I'll volunteer as the subject." He began removing his shirt, revealing a body thick with muscle and old scars. "Let's see if you can bind a werewolf, little human. Especially one who very much wants to kill you." Terror and determination warred within me. This was it, the moment that would prove or disprove everything. Thane's hand briefly squeezed my shoulder. "Trust yourself," he whispered. "Trust your blood." I stepped forward into the circle, facing Corbin across the altar as the full moon rose higher. The trial was about to begin. Chapter 8, Trial of Binding. The gathered werewolves formed a wider circle, giving us space. Niamh took position at the altar's edge, her staff planted firmly in the earth. The other alphas arranged themselves at cardinal points, witnesses to ensure fairness, though I suspected Corbin had no intention of playing fair. "The rules are simple," Neve announced, her voice carrying across the hushed crowd. Vesper Thorn must restrain Corbin in his wolf form using only Boundary Keeper authority. No physical weapons, no harm to the subject. The binding must hold for the count of 100 heartbeats. She paused meaningfully. Corbin, you are permitted to resist with full strength, but you may not cause lethal harm to the challenger. Of course not, Corbin said, though his smile suggested otherwise. I wouldn't dream of it. He stepped into the center of the circle, rolling his shoulders as power began to ripple across his skin. Any last words, human? Perhaps a prayer to whatever gods you worship. I ignored him, closing my eyes and reaching inward. Morgana's teachings flowed through my memory, not just the rituals and herb lore, but deeper wisdom. Stories of boundary keepers who'd walked between worlds, who'd commanded respect through authority that transcended physical strength. The binding is not forced, Morgana's voice echoed in my mind. It is recognition, a reminder of the covenant that connects us all. I opened my eyes, meeting Corbin's cold gaze. I'm ready. Then let's begin, Neve declared. May the ancestors guide true judgment. Corbin's transformation was both beautiful and terrible. His body contorted, bones reshaping with audible cracks. Fur erupted across his skin, dark as midnight with silver threading through it. His face elongated into a muzzle, filled with teeth designed to tear flesh. Within seconds, where a man had stood, a massive wolf now crouched, easily twice the size of any natural wolf, with eyes that burned with malevolent intelligence. He was magnificent and monstrous, alpha power radiating from him like heat. The wolf that was Corbin growled low, the sound vibrating through the ground beneath my feet. Then he lunged. Instinct took over. I couldn't think. I simply moved, drawing the ceremonial blade and slicing my palm in one fluid motion. Blood welled up, and I thrust my hand forward, not in attack, but in proclamation. By the blood of the covenant. My voice rang out, stronger than it had any right to be. By the oath sworn when our peoples first walked in peace. I bind you, Corbin Ashclaw, to the ancient law. The blood drops lifted from my palm, glowing with that same golden light from the cave. But this time, they multiplied, dozens, then hundreds of droplets forming a shimmering web between me and the charging wolf. Corbin hit the web and staggered, snarling in fury and surprise. The golden light wrapped around him like chains, not restraining his body, but his will. I felt the connection snap into place, a thread between my consciousness and his, pulling taut. He fought it. Oh, how he fought it. His alpha power crashed against my authority like waves against a cliff. I gasped as the force of his resistance threatened to overwhelm me, my knees buckling. Hold, I told myself desperately. Hold. But I was human, facing down a werewolf alpha with decades of accumulated power. The golden chains flickered, weakening. Corbin sensed it. He pushed harder, and I felt my control slipping. The crowd murmured, doubt, fear, vindication for those who'd expected me to fail. Then I felt it, a surge of support from behind me. Not physical, but something deeper. I glanced back and saw Thane, his hand pressed over his heart, eyes closed in concentration. Beside him, Sienna did the same. Then Finnick. Then Neve. One by one, others joined, Valen and his wolves, the Northern Alpha and his pack. Even some of the neutral witnesses placed hands over their hearts, lending their faith to my cause. They were amplifying my authority, acknowledging the covenant through their belief in it. Power flooded through me like lightning through a conduit. The golden chains blazed brighter, multiplying until Corbin was wrapped in a cocoon of light. He thrashed and snarled, but the binding held. 1. Neve began counting.
2.
3. I stood trembling, maintaining the connection through sheer force of will. Corbin's rage poured through the bond, his hatred, his fear that everything he'd built on tradition and power was crumbling. But beneath it, I sensed something else.
Shame.
Buried deep, but present. He knew, on some level, that his cause was wrong. 31. 32. 33. Sweat poured down my face. My vision blurred at the edges. The ceremonial blade fell from my nerveless fingers, clattering against stone. But I kept my hand raised, kept the blood bond active. 67. 68. 69. Corbin made one final, desperate surge against the binding. The golden chains cracked, threads breaking. Gasps rippled through the crowd. I felt consciousness slipping, darkness creeping in from the edges. Then Thane's voice cut through the chaos. Vesper, remember who you are. Who I was. Last of the Boundary Keepers. Daughter of Sienna and granddaughter of Morgana. Bridge between worlds. Protector of the innocent. I drew on that identity, that purpose, and poured it into the binding. The chains were formed, stronger than before, and I understood finally what Morgana had tried to teach me. The binding wasn't my power. It was the covenant itself, flowing through me. I was merely the channel, not the source. 96. 97. 98. 99. Niamh's voice rose. 100. The golden chains dissolved, and Corbin collapsed to the ground, transforming back into human form. He lay panting, naked and defeated, fury and grudging respect warring in his expression. I swayed, barely staying upright. Thane was there instantly, catching me before I fell, his arms strong and steady around my waist. You did it, he whispered fiercely. You magnificent, impossible woman. You did it. Niamh struck her staff against the ground, the sound echoing like a gavel. The trial is complete. Vesper Thorn has proven herself a legitimate boundary keeper by the oldest measure of our covenant law. She turned to address the full gathering, her ancient eyes sweeping across every face. Let no one question her authority again. The blood does not lie. The covenant recognizes its own. Silence held for a long moment, then Valen stepped forward, dropping to one knee. The Eastern Territory acknowledges the boundary keeper. The Northern Alpha followed suit, as does the North. Even some of the Western Territory wolves knelt, though Bronwyn herself remained standing, her expression sour. Corbin slowly pushed himself to his feet, accepting a cloak someone offered to cover his nakedness. He stared at me with a new calculation, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. Impressive, he admitted grudgingly. You have more strength than I credited. But this changes nothing regarding the half-bloods. Doesn't it? I countered, finding my voice despite exhaustion. I just proved that covenant law still holds. And covenant law is clear. Children of mixed blood are under boundary keeper protection until they come of age. You cannot execute them without violating the very traditions you claim to uphold. Corbin's jaw tightened. The council will still vote. And the council will vote fairly, Niamh interrupted sharply. Without prejudice or political manipulation. That is the law. She gestured to the altar. Place the children at the center. Let the alphas judge them on their own merits, not on fear and prejudice. Sienna stepped forward, carrying Raven while Thane brought Celeste. Together, they placed the twins on the altar, not in sacrifice but in presentation. The babies blinked in the moonlight, Celeste's dark eyes solemn while Raven made small cooing sounds. The 5 alphas approached, forming a circle around the altar. Each studied the twins intently, and I held my breath, aware that everything hung in this balance. Valen spoke first. I see no abomination here. Only innocence. Children who had no choice in their birth, but who could serve as bridges between our peoples if given the chance. They're half-human, Bronwyn objected. Their very existence dilutes our bloodlines. Or strengthen them, the Northern Alpha countered. Introducing new genetic diversity, new perspectives. The Northern Territory has thrived through selective integration. These children could do the same for the Central Territory. Odette, the Southern Alpha, had remained silent throughout. Now she leaned closer to the twins, studying them with an intensity that made me nervous. Raven chose that moment to reach up with tiny fingers, grasping at the air. Odette, surprisingly, offered her finger, which Raven immediately clutched with surprising strength. A smile, small but genuine, touched Odette's lips. Strong grip, she observed. Good instincts. She sensed I meant no harm and responded with trust, not fear. She straightened, addressing the gathering. I've ruled the Southern Territory for 40 years. I've seen many changes, resisted most of them, but I've also learned that rigid tradition leads to stagnation. She paused, her gaze moving to Thane. These children are innocent. More than that, they represent possibility. A future where our peoples might coexist rather than merely tolerate each other. She turned to Corbin. I vote to allow them to live and to restore Thane's kingship. With conditions. Hope surged in my chest. Beside me, I felt Thane's tension shift from dread to cautious optimism. What conditions? Corbin demanded. That Thane ruled with a council of advisors representing all territories, Odette said. That he commits to transparent governance and regular councils to address interterritorial concerns. And that the Boundary Keeper serves as official mediator for disputes involving human interests. Those are reasonable terms. Valen agreed immediately. The Northern Alpha nodded. The North accepts these conditions. Bronwyn looked conflicted, her ancient face twisted with the war between tradition and pragmatism. The West abstains from voting, she finally said. I won't support this path, but neither will I actively oppose it. The future will judge whether we've chosen wisdom or folly. That left Corbin. He stood rigid, defeat written in every line of his body. But his eyes still burned with calculation. The Central Territory rejects these terms, he said flatly. I maintain that Thane is unfit. You don't speak for the Central Territory, came a new voice from the crowd. A figure pushed through, a tall woman with dark hair and amber eyes, wearing battle leathers. Behind her, at least 30 wolves followed, all bearing the Central Territory markings. Commander Maya, Thane breathed, recognition and relief flooding his features. The woman, Maya, approached the altar, dropping to one knee before Thane. My king, the loyal guard has been searching for you since the coup. We stand ready to restore you to your rightful throne. She rose, turning to face Corbin. You led a rebellion, killed loyal wolves, and attempted to murder your king and his infant daughters. By any measure, you are a traitor here. Corbin's face went pale, then flushed with rage. You overstep, Commander. The council hasn't voted. Then let's vote, Niev said calmly. All in favor of restoring Thane Silverborn to the throne of the Central Territory and placing his daughters under Boundary Keeper protection until they come of age. The East votes in favor, Valen declared. The North votes in favor, confirmed the Northern Alpha. The South votes in favor, Odette added. 3 of 5. A clear majority. Niev struck her staff against the ground. The council has spoken. Thane Silverborn is restored as rightful Alpha King of the Central Territory. Celeste and Raven Silverborn are placed under the protection of Boundary Keeper Vesper Thorn until their 18th year. Any who harm them will answer to Covenant law. She turned her steely gaze on Corbin. As for you, Corbin Ashclaw, you're stripped of all authority and banished from Central Territory. You may seek refuge in another territory if one will accept you, but you will never again hold power in the kingdom you tried to steal. Corbin stood motionless for a long moment, his world crumbling around him. Then, without another word, he turned and stalked away into the darkness beyond the standing stones. Some wolves followed him, his most loyal supporters, but most remained. The gathered crowd erupted in mixed reactions, cheers from some, angry muttering from others, shocked silence from many. But the decision was made, the vote binding under Covenant law. Thane gathered his daughters from the altar, one in each arm, his eyes bright with tears. Thank you, he said to the assembled alphas. I swear I will honor the trust you've placed in me. Then he turned to me, and the look in his eyes held such fierce gratitude and something deeper, something that made my breath catch, that I had to look away, overwhelmed. We had won. Against all odds, we had won. But as I watched Corbin's retreating figure disappear into the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. Banishment wouldn't end his hatred. It would only transform it into something more dangerous. Still, for tonight, under the full moon's witness, we could celebrate. Celeste and Raven were safe. Thane was restored, and I had proven myself as a boundary keeper. Whatever came next, we would face it together. As the gathering began to disperse, wolves approaching to offer congratulations or allegiance to their restored king, Thane found his way back to my side. After the council, he said softly, echoing our repeated promise. I smiled, exhausted but happy. After the council, I agreed. And for once, after felt like the beginning of something, not the end. Chapter 9, Coronation and Consequence. The days following the council passed in a blur of activity and adjustment. Thane's restoration to the throne required formal ceremonies, political maneuvering, and the delicate work of rebuilding trust with wolves who had followed Corbin or remained neutral during the conflict. We returned to the Central Territory, to Silverborn, the seat of werewolf power in the region. The city, if it could be called that, was unlike any human settlement I'd seen. Structures grew seamlessly from the landscape, built into hillsides and massive trees, connected by rope bridges and winding paths. It was beautiful and wild, a perfect marriage of civilization and nature. The royal residence stood at the territory's heart, a sprawling complex of interconnected buildings surrounding an ancient oak so massive it took 20 people holding hands to circle its trunk. Thane called it the Heart Tree, planted by the first Alpha King centuries ago. Isabel loved it here, he said quietly as we stood beneath its branches on our second night in Silverborn. She would sit for hours reading in the shade, planning the gardens she wanted to plant. I heard the grief in his voice, raw even now. Tell me about her, I said gently, if you want to. He was quiet for so long I thought he might refuse. Then he began to speak, words flowing like a dam finally breaking. She was brilliant. Not just intelligent, but perceptive in ways that constantly surprised me. She could read people, understand motivations, and fears they didn't even acknowledge themselves. A sad smile touched his lips. She saw through my kingly facade within minutes of meeting me. Called me out for posturing at a diplomatic reception. That must have been quite the first impression, I said, trying to imagine it. I was furious, he admitted with a soft laugh. No one spoke to me that way. But she just smiled and said if I wanted true allies, I needed to show my true self. He shook his head at the memory. She was right, of course. She usually was. How did she die? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Thane's expression darkened. Childbirth complications. The twins came early. We weren't prepared. Our healers did everything they could, but he swallowed hard. She hemorrhaged. By the time we realized how serious it was, there was nothing anyone could do. She died an hour after the twins were born, never even got to hold them together. Tears stung my eyes. I'm so sorry. Corbin used it immediately. Thane continued, bitterness creeping into his voice. Claimed it was proof that humans and werewolves shouldn't mix, that the ancestors had punished our union. He had half the council convinced within days. His hands clenched into fists. As if childbirth complications don't happen to werewolf women too. As if tragedy proves anything except that life is fragile. I placed my hand over his. She would be proud of you. Fighting for your daughters, for the future she believed in. I hope so, he said quietly. And I hope. He paused, turning to face me fully. I hope she will approve of you. Of what's growing between us. My heart stuttered. We'd barely had time to breathe since the council, let alone discuss our relationship. But now, standing beneath the heart tree with moonlight filtering through ancient branches, the conversation could no longer be avoided. Thane. I know the timing isn't ideal, he interrupted gently. I'm barely restored to my throne. You're still learning your role as boundary keeper, and the twins are so young. But Vesper, I can't keep pretending what I feel for you is just gratitude or alliance. He took both my hands in his, amber eyes intense in the darkness. I love you. Not the same way I loved Isabel. That was my youth, my first awakening. This is different. Deeper, maybe because it's built on shared struggle and mutual choice rather than passion alone. Tears spilled down my cheeks. I love you too, I whispered. But I'm terrified. What if I can't be what you need? What if the twins need a mother who's fully werewolf, who understands your world in ways I never can? The twins need someone who loves them unconditionally, Thane said firmly. Someone who will protect them, teach them, help them navigate both their human and wolf heritage. You've already proven you're that person, Vesper. Your people might not accept it, I warned. A human boundary keeper as their queen. Then they'll learn to accept it, he said with quiet authority. I didn't reclaim my throne just about to prejudice and tradition. If they trust me to lead, they'll trust my choice of mate. The word mate sent a shiver through me, loaded with werewolf cultural meaning I was still learning. It meant more than marriage, more than partnership. It meant soul-deep binding, recognized by pack and ancestors alike. Is that what you're asking? I said carefully. To be your mate? Your queen?
Eventually, he said.
When you're ready. I'm not asking you to decide tonight, Vesper. Just to acknowledge that's the direction we're heading. That what we have is real and worth building on. I thought of everything we'd been through. The desperate flight through the forest, the sacred cave, the trial before the council. I thought of how naturally we'd fallen into caring for the twins together, how his presence had become essential to my sense of safety and home. Yes, I said finally. I acknowledge it. And when the time is right, when we've both had time to breathe and settle into our roles. Yes, I want that future with you. His smile was brilliant, transforming his usually serious features into something joyful and young. He pulled me close, and our lips met in a kiss that was both promise and celebration. Unlike the tentative kiss we'd shared before, this one was certain, committed. When we finally pulled apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine. Thank you, he whispered, for choosing us. For choosing this impossible, complicated life. Thank you for giving me something worth choosing, I replied. A discreet cough interrupted us. We sprang apart to find Commander Maya standing a respectful distance away, her expression carefully neutral. Apologies for the interruption, my king, she said. But there's a situation that requires your attention. Thane's demeanor shifted instantly from lover to leader. What kind of situation? Border scouts report movement in the western boundary, wolves bearing no territorial markings, approximately 20 strong. They're not approaching aggressively, but they're also not leaving. Corbin's exiles, I said, recognizing the threat immediately. Thane's jaw tightened. Gather the guard. I want a full escort to the western boundary within the hour. Already done, my king, Maya said with a slight smile. I took the liberty of preparing for your orders. Good.
He turned to me.
You should stay here with the twins. Absolutely not, I interrupted. If this involves Corbin's followers, it involves me. I'm the boundary keeper. Border disputes are literally my responsibility. He looked ready to argue, then seemed to recognize the futility.
Fine.
But you stay behind the guard at all times. And if things turn violent, I'll use boundary keeper authority to stop it, I said firmly. That's what I'm here for, remember? Within the hour, we rode out, a contingent of 30 wolves accompanying Thane and me toward the western boundary. Some traveled in human form on horseback, others ran as wolves, keeping pace effortlessly. The twins remained at the royal residence under Sienna and Phoenix protection, surrounded by loyal guards. The ride took most of the night. As dawn approached, we reached the boundary, a river that served as natural demarcation between central and western territories. On the far bank, just as Maya had reported, a group of wolves waited. I recognized Corbin immediately, even at a distance. He stood at the group's center, no longer radiating alpha authority, but something harder, more desperate. The wolves around him looked lean and hungry, exiles surviving on the fringes. This should be handled peacefully, I said to Thane as we dismounted. Let me try talking to them first. Vesper. Trust me, I said, echoing his own words from the council trial. He nodded reluctantly. 5 minutes. If they show any aggression, you retreat immediately. I approached the riverbank, aware of every eye watching, both Thane's guard behind me and Corbin's exiles across the water. The ceremonial blade hung at my hip, its presence comforting even though I hoped not to use it. Corbin Ashclaw, I called across the water. What brings you to the central territory boundary? Business that doesn't concern humans, he replied coldly. All boundary matters concern me, I countered. That's what boundary keeper means. So I'll ask again. What's your purpose here? A younger wolf beside Corbin stepped forward. I recognized him as one of Corbin's companions from the Sacred Cave confrontation. We seek asylum, he said. The Western Territory won't accept us. The South refused. We have nowhere else to go. Surprise rippled through me. They wanted to come back? After everything? You led a coup, I said, directing my words to Corbin. You tried to murder your king and his infant daughters. Why should the Central Territory offer you anything but justice? Because I'm asking for mercy, not justice, Corbin said, and something in his voice had changed. The arrogance stripped away, leaving raw desperation. My followers had no part in planning the coup. They followed my orders, as wolves follow their alpha. Punish me if you must, but let them return home. I turned back to Thane, who'd moved closer, his expression unreadable. This is your decision, I said quietly. Your territory, your judgment. Thane studied the group across the river, his gaze lingering on faces he clearly recognized. How many of them fought against us during the coup? He asked Maya. Perhaps half, she replied. The others are followers who fled rather than face judgment, but they didn't directly participate in violence. Thane was silent for a long moment, and I could see the war playing out behind his eyes. The desire for vengeance against the need to show mercy, to prove himself better than Corbin had been. The Central Territory will accept those who didn't participate in violence, he finally declared, his voice carrying across the water. But there are conditions. They'll undergo a trial period, prove their loyalty through service. And they'll publicly renounce Corbin's leadership and acknowledge my rightful rule. Hope flickered in several faces across the river. But Corbin's expression remained bitter. And me, he asked. What's my fate, merciful king? You remain banished, Thane said flatly. You led a coup, ordered executions, and attempted to murder children. Mercy has limits, Corbin. Be grateful, I'm not demanding your life. Grateful. Corbin spat the word. For exile and humiliation? For watching everything I built crumble? You built nothing, Thane countered, anger finally breaking through his controlled demeanor. You clung to tradition and fear, tried to drag our people backward into isolation. The only thing that crumbled was your own ambition. He gestured to the wolves waiting behind Corbin. Those who wish to return, cross now. Those who choose to follow Corbin further into exile, go with my pity. But know this, the Central Territory's borders are closed to you permanently if you leave now. For a tense moment, no one moved. Then, slowly, wolves began crossing the river. One by one, then in groups, they waded through the water and emerged on the Central Territory side, where Maya's guards surrounded them, not threateningly, but firmly. By the time the exodus ended, only 5 wolves remained with Corbin. He stared at Thane with undisguised hatred, but also something else, defeat, maybe, or the beginning of bitter acceptance. This isn't over, Corbin said, his voice carrying across the water one final time. You think you've won, but change always breeds resistance. Eventually, your precious bridges will burn, and wolves will remember why we kept ourselves separate. Perhaps, Thane acknowledged. Or perhaps future generations will wonder why we ever feared connection. He turned away, dismissing Corbin as thoroughly as words could. Let's go home. As we rode back towards Silverborn, the returned exiles marching under guard, I felt the weight of what had just happened. We'd shown mercy, but also justice. We'd built a bridge even to those who'd tried to destroy us. It was a small victory, but significant. The kind of victory that proved we were building something new, not through force alone, but through the harder work of compassion and wisdom. That was well done, I said to Thane as we rode side by side. We'll see, he replied. Some of the council will say, I was too lenient. Others will say, I was too harsh by maintaining Corbin's exile. You can't please everyone, I pointed out. No, he agreed with a slight smile. But I can try to do what's right. And hope that's enough. As Silverborn came into view, the heart tree rising above the settlement like a beacon, I felt something settle in my chest.
This was home now.
These were my people, not just Thane and the twins, but all of them. The wolves trying to build a better future, the exiles hoping for redemption, the children who would grow up in a world less rigid than their parents knew. It wouldn't be easy. Corbin's warning held true, change always bred resistance. But we would face it together, boundary keeper and king, building bridges faster than others could burn them. And that, I thought, was what hope looked like. Chapter 10. Building a Kingdom. 3 months passed in what felt like both an eternity and the blink of an eye. Autumn deepened into early winter, painting Silverborn in shades of amber and crimson before the first snows arrived. The twins grew at an astonishing rate, their baby fat giving way to more defined features, their eyes tracking movement with increasing awareness, their tiny hands grasping at everything within reach. Celeste had her father's intensity, studying the world with solemn dark eyes that seemed to comprehend far more than an infant should. Raven was more playful, quick to smile and laugh, her bright blue eyes sparkling with mischief even at 3 months old. I found myself wholly devoted to them in ways I hadn't anticipated. Every morning began with their hungry cries. Every evening ended with rocking them to sleep while humming songs Morgana had once sung to me. They were mine now, not by blood but by choice, the deepest kind of belonging. Thane's formal coronation took place on the winter solstice, a ceremony steeped in tradition, yet adapted to reflect his progressive vision. Representatives from all 5 territories attended, including a reluctant Alpha Bronwyn from the west, who made her disapproval clear through tight-lipped silence, but adhered to protocol. I stood beside him during the ceremony, not as queen yet, but as boundary keeper, officially recognized in my role. Niev performed the rituals, crowning Thane with a circlet of woven silver and oak leaves while the gathered wolves howled their approval. "Do you swear to lead with wisdom and strength?" Niev intoned, her voice carrying across the ceremonial grounds. "I swear it," Thane replied, his voice steady and sure. "Do you swear to protect all under your rule, regardless of their blood?" "I swear it." "Do you swear to honor the ancient covenants and work toward balance between all peoples?" "I swear it." Niev placed the crown upon his head, then turned to address the assembly. "Let all witness, Thane Silverborn is crowned Alpha King of the Central Territory. May his reign bring prosperity and peace." The howls that erupted were deafening, echoing off the mountains surrounding Silverborn. I felt tears prick my eyes, overwhelmed by the weight of the moment and all it represented. Afterward, during the feast that followed, Thane found me on a balcony overlooking the celebration. Music and laughter drifted up from below, where wolves danced and feasted in honor of their restored king. "Hiding from your own party?" I teased as he joined me. "Needing a moment to breathe," he corrected, slipping his arm around my waist. "It's been a long day." "It's been a long few months," I amended. He pulled me closer, and we stood in comfortable silence, watching our people celebrate. Our people. The phrase still felt strange, but increasingly right. "I've been thinking," Thane said finally, "about timing." My heart skipped. Timing for what? For us. He turned to face me fully, his amber eyes reflecting the torchlight from below. "I know we agreed to wait, to let things settle. But Vesper, I don't want to wait anymore. I want to make this official. I want you as my mate, my queen. I want us to be a family in every sense of the word." I'd known this conversation was coming, had prepared arguments and concerns. But standing there with him, feeling the rightness of it in my bones, all my carefully planned objections dissolved. "Yes," I said simply. Surprise flickered across his face. "Yes? Just like that? No concerns about timing or politics or—" "Oh, I have concerns," I interrupted with a laugh. "Dozens of them. But I also know that waiting won't make them go away. And I don't want to waste any more time being cautious when I could be living." His smile was brilliant. He lifted me off my feet, spinning me once before setting me down and kissing me thoroughly. When we finally broke apart, both breathless, he pressed his forehead to mine. The mating ceremony can happen whenever you're ready, he said. Tomorrow, next week, next month. Spring, I decided. After the thaw. Give people time to adjust to me as boundary keeper before adding queen to the title. And it gives us time to... I hesitated, then forged ahead. To figure out how to honor Isabel's memory while moving forward. Something softened in his expression.
You don't need to worry about that.
Isabel will always be the twins' birth mother, always holding a place in my history. But you're my future Vesper. She would understand that. She'd probably be frustrated we waited this long. I laughed despite the tears threatening to spill. She sounds like she was remarkable. She was, he agreed. And so are you. Different, but equally remarkable. A commotion below drew our attention. Commander Maya was climbing the stairs to the balcony, her expression urgent despite the festivities. My king, apologies for the interruption, she said. But there's a messenger from the Northern Territory. Says it's urgent. Thane's expression shifted immediately to concern. Send them up. The messenger was a young wolf, clearly exhausted from hard travel. He bowed quickly before speaking. My king, Alpha Kirin sends word. There's been an incident at the human border settlement of Millbrook. Attacks on livestock, property destruction. The humans blame wolves and are organizing hunting parties. My stomach dropped. This was exactly the kind of conflict boundary keepers were meant to prevent. Do we know if it actually was wolves? I asked. Unknown, the messenger replied. But the Northern Alpha requests your presence, both of you. He thinks boundary keeper authority might be needed to defuse the situation before it escalates into violence. Thane and I exchanged glances. So much for our celebration. Gather a diplomatic party. Thane ordered Maya. Small, non-threatening. We leave at first light. I'll prepare, Maya said, already turning to go. After the messenger departed, I leaned against the balcony railing, frustration and determination warring within me. Welcome to Queenship, I muttered, where even your engagement night gets interrupted by crises. Thane moved behind me, his hands resting on my shoulders. This is what we signed up for. Building bridges, preventing conflicts, protecting both our peoples. I know, I sighed. Doesn't make it less annoying. His laugh rumbled against my back. Come on. Let's check on the twins, get some rest. Tomorrow, we start proving that our vision works. We reached Millbrook 3 days later, after hard riding through winter-touched forest. The settlement was modest, perhaps 200 humans living on the edge of werewolf territory, relying on logging and farming for survival. The Northern Alpha, Kirin, met us at the boundary with Finnick and Sienna in his party. Thank you for coming so quickly, Kirin said, clasping Thane's forearm in greeting. The situation has deteriorated. The humans found another slaughtered cow this morning, and they're convinced it's werewolf work. Is it? I asked directly. Kirin's expression was troubled. I don't know. The wounds could be from a wolf, or from a bear, or from someone trying to make it look like a wolf attack. Someone like Corbin's remaining followers? Thane suggested grimly. Possible, Kirin acknowledged. He's been spotted in the region, though always at a distance. He could be orchestrating this to undermine the peace we're trying to build. Sienna stepped forward, worry etched on her face. The humans are scared, Vesper. Scared people make dangerous decisions. They've already sent for hunters from the regional militia. Then we need to act fast, I said. Can you arrange a meeting with the settlement's leaders? Already done, Kirin replied. They've agreed to meet with you, the boundary keepers specifically. They're curious about what that means. An hour later, I stood in Millbrook's meeting hall, facing a dozen suspicious and frightened humans. The settlement elder, a weathered man named Thomas, led the questioning. You claim to be some kind of mediator, he said, studying me skeptically. But you're traveling with werewolves. Why should we trust anything you say? Because I'm human, I replied simply. Born and raised in a human settlement much like this one. I understand your fear because I lived it. The forest boundary terrified me my whole life. That got their attention. Murmurs rippled through the gathered humans. Then why side with them? A younger woman demanded. Why protect monsters that are killing our livestock? Because I don't know what they are, I said honestly. And neither do you. Someone or something is attacking your herds, yes. But assuming it's werewolves without evidence is exactly the kind of prejudice that leads to innocent deaths on both sides. I pulled out my ceremonial blade, laying it on the table between us. This knife has been passed down through generations of my family. Boundary keepers who stood between human and werewolf, who prevented conflicts through investigation and wisdom rather than violence. That's what I'm offering you now, an honest investigation and justice for whoever is actually responsible. Thomas studied the blade, recognition flickering in his eyes. I've heard stories of boundary keepers. My grandfather spoke of them, said they kept the peace in his youth. And I'm trying to keep it now, I said. But I need your cooperation. No hunting parties, no retribution until we know the truth. Give me 3 days to investigate. If I find werewolves are responsible, they'll face justice under both their laws and yours. If it's something else, we'll handle it together. The settlers conferred quietly among themselves. Finally, Thomas nodded. 3 days. But if there's another attack at that time, all bets are off. Understood. I agreed. Outside the meeting hall, Thane waited with barely contained tension. Well, 3 days to find answers, I said. No pressure. He managed a wry smile. I'll organize search parties. We'll scour the area for signs of what's really happening. Over the next 2 days, we combed the forest around Millbrook. Thane's wolves used their superior senses to track and investigate, while I examined each attack site, looking for patterns and evidence. What we found was disturbing. The attacks weren't random. They followed a specific pattern, targeting farms on the settlement's western edge, always occurring near dawn when witnesses would be scarce. The wounds on the livestock were consistent with wolf attacks, but something felt wrong. Too precise, too deliberately theatrical. On the third morning, we finally got our break. A young wolf from Kieran's pack discovered tracks leading away from the latest attack site, wolf tracks that shifted mid-stride to human boot prints. A shifter. But the scent was wrong, carrying an acrid undertone that Thane identified immediately. Corbin's scent marker, he said grimly. He's been here recently. We followed the trail deeper into the forest until it led to a small camp. 3 wolves waited there, all bearing Corbin's exile markings. They tried to flee when they spotted us, but Thane's party surrounded them quickly. Why? I demanded, once they were restrained. Why attack the settlement and blame your own kind? The oldest of the 3, a scarred wolf with defiant eyes, spat at my feet. Because Corbin was right. Humans and wolves can't coexist. We're proving it. Sooner or later, your precious peace will collapse, and when it does, wolves will remember why we stayed separate. You're not proving anything except your own cruelty, I said coldly. You're manufacturing conflict to justify your prejudice. We're forcing people to see reality, he countered. Your bridges are built on sand, boundary keeper. The first storm will wash them away. Thane stepped forward, his alpha authority radiating like heat. You've confessed to orchestrating attacks meant to incite violence between species. That's treason against the Covenant and against your king. You'll face trial. We brought the culprits back to Millbrook, presenting the evidence to Thomas and the settlers. The relief on their faces when they learned it wasn't random wolf attacks, that it was sabotage by exiles, was palpable. Justice will be served, I promise them. These wolves will be tried under werewolf law, with human witnesses present to ensure fairness. And we'll station guards, both human and wolf, to prevent future incidents. Thomas extended his hand, and I shook it firmly. You kept your word, boundary keeper. Maybe there's hope for peace after all. There is, I said with more confidence than I felt. If we keep choosing it, every single day. The trial took place a week later in Silverbourne, with representatives from both Millbrook and the Northern Territory present. The 3 saboteurs were found guilty and sentenced to permanent exile beyond all territorial boundaries, banished not just from one pack, but from werewolf society entirely. It was harsh justice, but necessary. We couldn't afford to show weakness when the stakes were so high. As winter deepened and the new year approached, life in Silverborn found its rhythm. The twins continued growing, Thane's reforms slowly took root, and I settled into my dual role as boundary keeper and future queen. There were challenges, there always would be. Traditionalists who resisted change, humans who feared werewolves, and somewhere out in the wilderness, Corbin and his remaining followers nursing their resentments. But there were victories too. Trade routes established with human settlements. Half-blood wolves are welcomed into packs without stigma. Children, both human and wolf, are learning each other's languages and customs. One evening, as the first true blizzard of winter howled outside, I sat by the fire in our quarters with Celeste sleeping against my shoulder and Raven nestled in my lap. Thane worked at his desk, reviewing treaty documents, but his eyes kept drifting to us with an expression that made my heart full to bursting. "What?" I asked, catching him staring. "Nothing," he said with a soft smile. "Just thinking how impossible this would have seemed a year ago. How impossible you seemed." "Impossible in a good way?" "In the best way," he confirmed, setting aside his work to join us. He carefully gathered Raven into his arms, and we sat together in comfortable silence, our makeshift family complete. Outside, the storm raged. But inside, we were warm and safe and whole. And for now, that was enough. Chapter 11. Spring and Ceremony. Winter released its grip slowly, reluctantly, as if the mountains themselves were hesitant to let go of the cold. But by early spring, the first green shoots pushed through melting snow, and the forest began its annual transformation from dormant gray to vibrant life. The twins celebrated their 6-month milestone with remarkable developments. Celeste had begun pulling herself up on furniture, her determination to stand evident in every wobbling attempt. Raven had discovered her voice, babbling constantly in sounds that sometimes seemed almost like words. Both had started showing subtle signs of their dual nature, enhanced strength for their age, eyes that occasionally caught light with an amber gleam, hearing sharp enough to detect footsteps from rooms away. "They're going to shift early," Thane predicted one morning, watching Celeste gnaw on a teething toy with slightly sharper-than-human canines. Most wolf children don't show their first transformation until age 5 or 6, but half-bloods sometimes manifest younger. "Is that dangerous?" I asked, concerned immediately. "Not if we're prepared," he assured me. "We'll need to create a safe space for them, teach them control gradually." It's actually a good sign. It means their wolf nature is strong despite their mixed blood. I marveled at how casually we discussed such things now. 6 months ago, the very concept of werewolves had been theoretical. Now I was planning for my daughter's first transformations, as if it were as normal as planning for their first steps. Our mating ceremony was set for the spring equinox, a date chosen for its symbolic significance of balance between light and dark, human and wolf. Preparations consumed Silverborn for weeks leading up to it. Unlike Thane's coronation, which had been about political restoration, this was personal. A celebration of union, of family, of the future we were building together. Sienna threw herself into the preparations with enthusiasm that bordered on obsession. I suspected she was trying to make up for missing my entire childhood by creating the perfect wedding, but I didn't have the heart to tell her to scale back. "The flowers alone require coordination with 3 different territories," she said one afternoon, reviewing lists in our quarters while I nursed Raven. "The Northern Territory is providing mountain laurel, the East is sending cherry blossoms, and the South promised moonflowers." "It sounds beautiful," I said, though privately I thought it was far more elaborate than necessary. "It needs to be perfect," Sienna insisted. "You're not just mating the king, Vesper. You're making a statement that humans and wolves can join completely, that boundaries can be crossed without losing what makes each side unique." She paused, her expression softening. "And perhaps I'm trying to give you the celebration I never had. When I mated Finnick, it was done quietly, almost shamefully. The Northern Territory accepted me, but barely. I want your day to be joyful, proud, and public." I reached across the table, squeezing her hand. "Thank you. For everything. For being here, for loving the twins, for trying to make up for lost time." Tears glittered in her eyes. I can never truly make up for abandoning you. You didn't abandon me, I interrupted gently. You made an impossible choice in impossible circumstances. And look at us now, 3 generations of thorn women, all alive, all together. That's not a tragedy. That's a gift. She came around the table, embracing me carefully, so as not to disturb Raven. When did you become so wise? I had good teachers, I replied, thinking of Morgana and her cryptic lessons, of Neve's patient instruction, of everything I'd learned through trial and necessity. The week before the ceremony brought an unexpected visitor. I was in the garden, Isabel's garden, which I'd slowly been restoring, when Commander Maya found me. Lady Vesper, there's someone at the gates requesting an audience. A human woman from the settlement where you were raised. Surprise jolted through me. From my old town? Who? She gave her name as Margaret. Says she was a friend of your grandmother's. I remembered Margaret vaguely, an older woman who'd sometimes visited Morgana, bringing preserves and gossip in equal measure. What could bring her all the way to Silverborn? I found her in the reception hall, looking overwhelmed by the grandeur and the werewolves moving around her. But when she saw me, her face lit with relief and wonder. Vesper Chase. Or should I say Lady Vesper now? She embraced me warmly. Look at you, child. Morgana would be beside herself with pride. It's good to see you, Margaret, I said sincerely. But what brings you here? Her expression grew serious. I came to warn you, actually. There's been talk in the human settlements, not just ours, but the regional towns. About you. My stomach tightened. What kind of talk? Some call you a traitor for siding with werewolves. Others say you're bewitched, that the wolves are using you for their own purposes. She hesitated. And there's a group forming. Hunters, mostly. They call themselves the Pure Guard. They're organizing against werewolf territories, claiming you're proof that wolves are infiltrating human society. That's absurd, I said. I'm not infiltrating anything. I'm trying to build peace. I know that, Margaret interrupted gently. And many others do too. But fear makes people irrational, Vesper. Especially when someone like Thomas Corbin is stoking those fears. I froze. Thomas Corbin? Any relation to his nephew, Margaret confirmed grimly. Human, but raised on his uncle's stories about werewolf treachery. He's been traveling between settlements, giving speeches about the werewolf threat. Using your relationship with the werewolf king as evidence that they're trying to control humans through seduction and manipulation. Rage and frustration warred within me. Even in exile, Corbin was causing problems. And now he'd apparently recruited his human family to continue his campaign of hatred. What do they plan to do? I asked. I don't know the specifics, Margaret admitted. But there's talk of a demonstration during your mating ceremony. A public protest to reclaim you from werewolf influence. She gripped my hands urgently. Be careful, child. Not everyone sees what you're building as progress. Some see it as betrayal. After Margaret departed, with promises to keep me informed of developments, I went immediately to find Thane. He was in the strategy room with Maya and several advisors, but one look at my face had him dismissing them. What's wrong? I told him everything. As I spoke, his expression grew progressively darker. We should cancel the ceremony, he said immediately. Or at least postpone it. If there's a threat. Absolutely not, I interrupted firmly. That's exactly what they want, to intimidate us into hiding, into being ashamed of what we're building. We proceed as planned, but with increased security. Vesper, if something happens to you, then we'll handle it together, I said, echoing his own words back to him. I won't let fear dictate our choices. That's how Corbin wins, even in exile. He pulled me close, his arms tight around me. You're infuriatingly brave, you know that? I learned from the best, I murmured against his chest. The days before the ceremony passed in a whirlwind of final preparations and security arrangements. Scouts reported increased human activity near the territory boundaries, but no overt threats. The Pure Guard's demonstration, if it came, would likely be vocal rather than violent, at least initially. The night before the ceremony, I lay awake long after Thane had fallen asleep beside me. Tomorrow would change everything, make official what had already become true in my heart. I would become not just Boundary Keeper, but Queen. Not just Vesper Thorn, but Vesper Silverborn. The responsibility of it pressed down like physical weight. What if I failed? What if the protesters were right, and I was naive to think humans and werewolves could truly coexist? A small sound drew my attention to the twins' crib. Celeste stood gripping the bars, her dark eyes watching me with that unsettling awareness. She couldn't possibly understand my anxiety, yet she reached out one tiny hand, opening and closing her fist in a gesture I'd come to recognize. She wanted to be held. I gathered her carefully, bringing her back to bed with me. She settled against my chest, one small hand resting over my heart. Within moments, she was asleep again, trusting and peaceful. Looking down at her, at this perfect blend of human and wolf, of Thane's blood and Isabel's sacrifice and my chosen love, I felt my resolve crystallize. This was why we fought. This was why bridges mattered more than walls. For children who deserved a world where they weren't forced to choose between halves of themselves. Where love wasn't constrained by species or prejudice. Where the future could be shaped by hope rather than fear. Tomorrow, I would stand before both peoples and make vows that transcended politics or strategy. I would choose love, choose family, choose the harder path of building rather than destroying. And whatever came after, protests, threats, resistance, we would face it together. With that certainty warming me like a candle flame against the dark, I finally drifted into sleep. The spring equinox dawned clear and bright, the sky so blue it hurt to look at directly. The ceremony would take place at sunset, when day and night held perfect balance, but preparations began at dawn. Sienna and a small army of attendants descended on me, transforming me from sleepy mother to ceremonial queen. The dress they created was stunning, white silk embroidered with green vines and silver wolves, a perfect marriage of human elegance and werewolf symbolism. My hair was braided with spring flowers, and they painted my face with subtle markings that Sienna said represented the Boundary Keeper lineage. "You look like a legend come to life," she whispered, tears streaming down her face as she fastened Morgana's ceremonial blade at my hip, the one piece I'd insisted on wearing. In another room, Thane underwent his own preparations. We wouldn't see each other until the ceremony itself, tradition demanding this brief separation before permanent union. As afternoon lengthened toward evening, guests began arriving. All 5 territorial alphas came, even Bronwyn, whose presence felt more like grudging obligation than celebration. Human representatives from friendly settlements attended too, including Thomas from Millbrook and several others who'd benefited from trade agreements. And yes, there were protesters. The Pure Guard gathered at the territory boundary, perhaps 50 humans carrying signs and chanting slogans about protecting humanity from werewolf corruption. They couldn't enter Silverborn without permission, but their voices carried a discordant note against the celebration. "Ignore them," Neve advised, finding me in my preparation chamber. "They're irrelevant noise. What matters is the choice you and Thane are making and the future it represents." "I know," I said, "but it still hurts. Knowing some of my own kind sees me as a traitor." "Some always will," Neve said pragmatically. "Just as some wolves will always resist change. But more will see the truth, that bridges benefit everyone, that love transcends boundaries. You're planting seeds today, Vesper. The harvest comes later." As the sun began its descent, I made my way to the heart tree where the ceremony would take place. The massive oak had been decorated with thousands of flowers, creating a canopy of color above the ceremonial space. Witnesses filled every available spot, wolves in both human and shifted forms, humans standing slightly apart but present nonetheless. Music began, drums and flutes creating a rhythm that seemed to echo the heartbeat of the forest itself. And then Thane appeared. He wore formal leathers marked with his royal insignia, his dark hair loose around his shoulders, the crown of oak and silver resting on his brow. But what struck me most was his expression, pure joy mixed with wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe this moment was real. Our eyes met across the space, and everything else faded. The protesters' distant chanting, the weight of expectations, the political implications, none of it mattered. There was only him, only us, only this choice we were making freely. Neve stood at the heart tree's base, her ancient staff planted firmly in the earth. As Thane and I approached from opposite sides, meeting at the tree's trunk, she began to speak. We gather under the balance of light and dark, on ground sacred to both wolf and human, to witness the mating of King Thane's Silverborn and Vesper Thorn, Boundary Keeper. This union represents more than personal love. It represents hope for a future where our peoples walk together rather than apart. She turned to Thane. Do you, Alpha King, take this human as your mate? Knowing the challenges it brings, the resistance you'll face, the bridge you're choosing to build. I do, Thane said, his voice carrying clearly. Not despite these challenges, but because they matter. Because she matters. Because the future we're building together matters more than the comfort of tradition. Neve turned to me. Do you, Boundary Keeper, take this wolf as your mate? Knowing you'll walk between worlds forever, belonging fully to neither, bearing the weight of both. I met Thane's amber eyes, and saw reflected there all the love and certainty I felt in my own heart. I do, I said firmly. Not because it's easy, but because it's right. Because he's worth it. Because the family we're creating is worth every challenge. Then, by the authority of the covenant, by the witness of both peoples, by the blessing of the ancestors, Neve declared, I bind you as mates. 2 souls, 2 worlds, 1 future. She took our hands, placing them together, then wrapped a silver cord around our joined wrists. What is bound here cannot be easily broken. What is chosen here echoes through generations. May your union bring balance. May your love build bridges. May your children inherit a world better than the one we made. The cord glowed briefly, covenant magic recognizing and sealing our bond. Then Thane pulled me close, and our lips met in a kiss that felt like coming home and launching into adventure simultaneously. The gathered witnesses erupted, howls from the wolves, cheers from the humans, a cacophony of celebration that drowned out the distant protesters completely. When we finally broke apart, breathless and grinning, Thane whispered against my ear, Hello, my queen. Hello, my king, I replied. And as the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, I knew with absolute certainty that we'd made the right choice. The bridge was built. Now came the work of maintaining it, of inviting others to cross, of proving that what seemed impossible was merely difficult, and worth every moment of effort. Hand in hand, we turned to face our people, both wolf and human, both celebrating our union, and began walking toward the future we'd chosen together. Chapter 12, Shadows and Light. The celebration following the mating ceremony lasted 3 days, a continuous feast of food, music, and storytelling that blurred the line between human and werewolf traditions. By the 3rd night, even the most skeptical attendees seemed caught up in the spirit of unity, sharing drinks and tales across species boundaries that had stood for generations. But beneath the joy, tension simmered. Reports came daily of the Pure Guard's growing influence in human settlements. Thomas Corbin, the nephew, had proven a charismatic speaker, twisting facts and exploiting fears with practiced skill. He claimed my mating to Thane was the first step in a werewolf plot to subjugate humanity, that boundary keepers were nothing but collaborators in their own people's enslavement. He's gained support from 3 major settlements, Maya reported during a private council meeting a week after the ceremony, including Riverton, which has substantial military resources. How substantial? Thane asked, his expression grim. 200 trained fighters, plus militia reserves, Maya replied. If they mobilize against us, it won't be a simple border skirmish. It'll be a war. The word hung heavy in the air. War. Everything we'd fought to prevent, the very reason boundary keepers existed, now looming as a real possibility. We need to address this directly, I said. Not through intermediaries or messages. I need to go to these settlements myself, speak to the people Thomas is manipulating. Absolutely not, Thane said immediately. You'd be walking into hostile territory. I'd be doing my job, I interrupted. A boundary keeper doesn't just mediate after conflicts arise. We prevent them by facilitating understanding. These humans need to see that I haven't been corrupted or controlled. They need to hear the truth from someone they recognize as their own. She's right, Niev said quietly. The elder had remained in Silverborn after the ceremony, sensing the gathering storm. Thomas Corbin is counting on absence and mystery to fuel his narrative. Vesper's presence would disrupt that. Then I'll go with her, Thane insisted. I shook my head. Your presence would confirm their fears. A werewolf king escorting his human mate like a possession. I need to go alone, or, at most, with human companions. I don't like this, Thane growled, his wolf nature surfacing in his agitation. I don't either, I admitted. But I like the alternative less. If we do nothing, Thomas builds his army. If we respond with military force, we prove his point. Diplomacy is the only path that doesn't lead to bloodshed. Finnick cleared his throat. I could accompany her. I'm mated to a human, known in some of the settlements. My presence might ease concerns. And I'll go too, Sienna added. As her mother and a human who chose this life willingly. We can present a united front. After hours of debate, the plan was reluctantly approved. I would travel to Riverton and the other sympathetic settlements, attempt to counter Thomas Corbin's propaganda, and hopefully prevent open conflict. We would depart in 3 days, giving time to prepare and to arrange security that wouldn't appear threatening. That night, alone in our chambers with the twins sleeping soundly, Thane held me with desperate intensity. I can't lose you, he whispered against my hair. Not now. Not after everything. You won't, I promised, though the words felt hollow even to me. I'll be careful. I'll take every precaution. Vesper, if something happens, then you'll raise Celeste and Raven to understand why I went, I said firmly. You'll teach them that some risks are worth taking, that bridge building sometimes means walking into uncertainty. I pulled back to meet his eyes. But nothing will happen. I'm coming back to you.
To them.
To the life we're building. He kissed me then, fierce and claiming, as if he could keep me safe through sheer force of will. When we finally lay down, he kept me pulled close, his body curved protectively around mine. I didn't sleep much that night, mind racing with everything that could go wrong. But when dawn came, I rose with determination. Fear was natural, but it couldn't be allowed to paralyze. The journey to Riverton took 2 days on horseback. Sienna, Finnick, and I traveled with a small escort of human guards from friendly settlements, visual proof that not all humans opposed werewolf alliances. We wore no obvious weapons, carried diplomatic banners, and sent messages ahead announcing our peaceful intentions. Riverton sat at a crossroads of major trade routes, making it strategically and economically important. Its cooperation could sway other settlements. Its opposition could spark regional conflict. The town's leadership had agreed to hear us, but made no promises beyond that. We arrived to find the town square packed with people. Hundreds of humans gathered to see the traitor queen, who'd mated a werewolf. The crowd's mood was volatile, hostile murmurs mixing with curious whispers. Thomas Corbin stood on a raised platform, clearly having expected our arrival. He was younger than I'd imagined, perhaps 30, with his uncle's cold eyes, but a more polished demeanor. When he saw us, his smile was predatory. And here she is, he announced to the crowd. Vesper Thorn, or should I say Vesper Silverborn, the human who abandoned her own kind to warm a monster's bed. Gasps and angry shouts erupted. I felt Finnick tense beside me, but I squeezed his arm in silent warning. We'd expected hostility. Rising to it would only prove Thomas's point. I'm here to speak the truth, I called out, my voice carrying across the square. Not to defend myself against childish insults, but to address the fears Thomas has been exploiting. May I be heard? The town's mayor, a middle-aged woman named Catherine, stepped forward. The council has granted you an audience, Lady Vesper. You may speak. I dismounted, approaching the platform. Thomas didn't yield his position, forcing me to stand below him, a calculated power play. But I'd learned from watching Thane that true authority didn't require elevated ground. I was born human. I began, addressing the crowd rather than Thomas. Raised in a settlement much like this one by my grandmother, who taught me to fear the forest boundary. I never imagined I'd cross it, let alone dedicate my life to building bridges between our peoples. Then what changed? Someone shouted. How did they bewitch you? No one bewitched me, I replied firmly. I made a choice. When I found a wounded man and his dying infant daughters in the forest, I chose compassion over fear. When I learned that man was a werewolf king and those children were half-blood, I chose to protect them rather than condemn them for existing. And when I discovered I carried the blood of ancient boundary keepers, humans charged with maintaining balance between species, I chose to honor that heritage. Beautiful words, Thomas interrupted with mocking applause. But words don't change facts. You mated a werewolf. You've given legitimacy to half-breed abominations. You're helping them infiltrate and control human society. I met a man who believes in coexistence, I countered. A king who's established trade routes that have brought prosperity to human settlements. Who's protected humans from rogue wolves. Who's working to create a future where both our peoples can thrive. I gestured to the crowd. How many of you have benefited from Northern Territory trade goods? Better tools, medicines, preserved foods. Murmurs of acknowledgement rippled through the assembly. Thomas's expression tightened. And those benefits come at what cost? He pressed. How long before they demand tribute? Before they claim authority over human lands? Before our children are forced into their packs? Never, I said flatly. That's the entire point of boundary keeper authority, to ensure neither side dominates the other. Yes, I'm queen of the Central Territory, but I'm also human, and I will never forget or abandon that part of myself. Prove it, Thomas challenged. Renounce your mate. Return to human society. If you truly haven't been corrupted, you'll choose your own kind over the wolves. The crowd went silent, everyone waiting for my response. I felt Sienna's presence behind me, solid and supportive, and thought of Thane back in Silverborn with our daughters. No, I said simply. Not because I've been corrupted, but because that's a false choice. I don't have to choose between being human and loving a werewolf. I don't have to reject one identity to honor the other. That's what you don't understand, Thomas. Bridge building doesn't require abandoning where you came from. It means expanding where you can go. I turned to address the crowd directly. I love my mate. I love our daughters. I love the life we're building together. But I also love humanity, love the settlements I'm trying to protect through diplomacy rather than division. Those loves don't conflict, they complement each other. And anyone who tells you otherwise is selling fear, not truth. She's a traitor, someone shouted. She's a bridge, another voice countered. Margaret, I realized, pushing through the crowd. I've known Vesper since she was a child. I knew her grandmother before that. The Thorn women have always stood between worlds, and we're safer for it. Other voices joined hers. Humans who'd benefited from werewolf trade, who'd been protected by Thane's guards, who'd seen firsthand that coexistence was possible. Thomas saw his control slipping. Don't be deceived by collaborators and wolf lovers. They're trying to. Enough. Mayor Catherine interrupted sharply. Thomas Corbin, you've had your say. Now the council will deliberate. She turned to me. Lady Vesper, you've spoken well. We'll consider your words along with Thomas's concerns. Our decision will be announced tomorrow. That night, housed in the mayor's residence under careful guard, I barely slept. Sienna and Finnick took turns keeping watch, neither trusting Thomas's supporters to honor diplomatic immunity. You are magnificent today, Sienna said during her watch, sitting beside my bed while I pretended to rest. So much like your grandmother. She would have been proud. I hope so, I murmured. I hope I'm making the right choices. There are no perfect choices, Sienna replied. Only honest ones. And you've been nothing if not honest. Morning came with surprising news. Mayor Catherine had called an emergency town meeting. When we arrived at the square, the atmosphere had shifted. Less hostile, more thoughtful. Catherine stood on the platform, Thomas conspicuously absent. "The council has deliberated through the night," she announced. "We've reviewed evidence of Northern Territory trade benefits. We've consulted historical records about boundary keepers. And we've considered both Lady Vesper's testimony and Thomas Corbin's concerns." She paused, building tension. "Riverton will not join the Pure Guard. We will maintain diplomatic relations with werewolf territories and support Lady Vesper's efforts to build lasting peace." Relief flooded through me so intensely I swayed. Finnick steadied me with a hand on my elbow. "However," Catherine continued, "we also call for formal protocols governing human-werewolf interactions. Clear boundaries, documented agreements, systems of accountability. Peace cannot be built on good intentions alone. It requires structure and mutual commitment." "That's more than fair," I agreed immediately. "I'll work with your council to establish those protocols, and I'll ensure werewolf territories honor them." Catherine nodded. "Then we have an accord." She extended her hand, and I climbed the platform to shake it, a public symbol of cooperation. The crowd's reaction was mixed, but generally positive. As we prepared to depart, Margaret approached with a warning. "Thomas didn't take this well," she said quietly. "He left in the night with about 20 followers. Said something about proving werewolves' true nature." Ice shot through my veins. "Where did he go?" "Toward the Central Territory boundary," Margaret replied. "I thought you should know." We rode hard for Silverborn, fear driving us faster than caution. If Thomas was planning something violent, if he attacked werewolf territory to prove his point, we arrived to find chaos. Smoke rose from the southern boundary, and wolves were mobilizing for defense. Maya met us at the gates, her expression grim. "Thomas Corbin and his followers attacked a border patrol," she reported. 3 wolves wounded, 2 humans killed when the patrol defended itself. It's exactly the incident he wanted, proof that werewolves are dangerous. "Where's Thane?" I demanded, leading the response. "He's trying to contain the situation, but Vesper?" She hesitated. "The wolves want blood for blood. They're calling for retaliation against human settlements." I didn't wait for more. I rode straight to the southern boundary, where I found Thane surrounded by angry wolves, all demanding permission to strike back. "Enough!" I shouted, my voice cracking with authority I didn't know I possessed. "There will be no retaliation." Dozens of amber eyes turned to me, many hostile. "They killed our brothers," one wolf snarled. "We have the right." "You have the right to justice, not vengeance," I interrupted. "Thomas wanted this. He orchestrated an attack specifically to provoke you into responding with violence. If you retaliate, you prove every lie he's told about werewolves being bloodthirsty monsters." "She's right," Thane said, though his expression was torn. "But Vesper, we can't let this go unanswered. Our people demand justice," I repeated, "through proper channels. We'll present evidence to human authorities, demand Thomas be tried for murder under human law. We'll show that, even when attacked, we choose legal process over mob violence." "That's not enough," someone growled. "It has to be," I said firmly, "because the alternative is war. And in war, everyone loses, especially Celeste and Raven, who deserve better than to grow up in a world torn apart by the same hatred that tried to kill them as infants." Slowly, grudgingly, the wolves backed down. Not happily, but acknowledging the truth of my words. That night, holding my daughters while Thane dealt with his furious council, I finally allowed myself to cry. The weight of it all, the constant threat, the impossible balance, the knowledge that one wrong move could destroy everything, pressed down until I could barely breathe. But when Celeste wrapped her tiny hand around my finger and Raven cooed softly against my chest, I found my center again. This was why.
This was always why.
For them, I would keep building bridges. Keep choosing the harder path of diplomacy over the easier road to violence. Keep believing that humans and werewolves could share a future, even when that belief felt impossible to maintain, even when the darkness pressed close. Because light required constant tending, but it was always worth the effort. Chapter 13, Legacy of Bridges. 1 year later, The first snow of winter drifted down in lazy spirals, dusting Silverborn in pristine white. I stood on the balcony of our quarters, watching the twins play in the courtyard below under Sienna's watchful eye. At 18 months, they were forced by nature, Celeste methodical and determined, stacking blocks with intense concentration, while Raven raced in circles, her laughter echoing off the stone walls. They had shifted for the first time 3 months ago, on the autumn equinox. Celeste had transformed into a small dark wolf, solemn even in fur, while Raven became a lighter-colored pup who immediately tried to play fight with everyone in sight. The shifts had been brief and exhausting for them, but successful, proof that their dual nature was not weakness, but strength. "You're thinking too hard again," Thane said, emerging onto the balcony with 2 mugs of spice cider. "I can hear your thoughts from inside." I accepted the mug gratefully, leaning into his warmth. "Just reflecting. It's been quite a year." "That's an understatement," he said with a soft laugh. He wasn't wrong. The year since Thomas Corbin's attack had tested us in ways I'd never imagined. But it had also brought unexpected victories. Thomas himself had been captured by human authorities and stood trial for murder, not in werewolf territory, but in a human court. His conviction and imprisonment had fractured the Pure Guard, many members abandoning the movement once its leader was revealed as a violent extremist rather than a principled protector. The formal protocols I'd helped establish with Riverton became a template for other settlements. Within 6 months, 10 major human communities had signed cooperation agreements with werewolf territories, trade pacts, mutual defense arrangements, and most importantly, systems for resolving disputes without violence. Not everyone accepted the changes. Corbin the Elder remained in exile, occasionally sending threats that amounted to nothing. Some wolves still grumbled about human influence. Some humans still feared werewolf power. But the center was holding, the bridge growing stronger with each crossing. "The Northern Alpha sent word," Thane said, pulling me from my reflections. "He's hosting a summit in the spring. All 5 territories plus representatives from a dozen human settlements. I want to formalize the regional cooperation framework." "That's ambitious," I said, though excitement stirred in my chest. A year ago, such a summit would have been impossible. Now it felt inevitable. "He's calling it the Covenant Assembly," Thane continued, acknowledging the ancient agreements while adapting them for modern needs. "And he wants you to serve as primary mediator." I turned to face him. "That's a tremendous responsibility." "You've been preparing for it your whole life," he replied. "Whether you knew it or not. Your grandmother knew. Your mother knew. The blood of boundary keepers runs true, Vesper." Below, Celeste's triumphant cry rang out. She'd successfully stacked all her blocks into a tower taller than herself. Raven immediately knocked it over, then looked shocked when her sister tackled her into the snow. They rolled together, half playing, half fighting, their laughter mixing in the cold air. "They're going to be formidable," I observed. "They already are," Thane said with pride. "Do you know what Celeste did yesterday? She mediated a dispute between 2 wolf pups fighting over a toy. I stood between them and wouldn't move until they agreed to share." He shook his head in wonder. 18 months old, and already showing boundary keeper instincts. "And Raven?" Raven convinced 3 older pups to follow her in a hunting expedition for treats in the kitchen. "She's going to be an alpha, that one. Charismatic, fearless, entirely too clever for everyone's good." I laughed, imagining our daughters grown, one a boundary keeper, one an alpha, both bridges between worlds in their own ways. "They're going to change everything, aren't they?" "They already have," Thane said softly. "Just by existing, they've proven what's possible. There are 5 other half-blood children in the Central Territory now, families who felt safe having children after seeing Celeste and Raven accepted. That number will grow." Movement at the courtyard entrance caught my attention. Neve appeared, moving slowly, but with her usual dignity. She'd aged visibly over the past year, the weight of centuries finally showing. But her eyes remained sharp as she approached the twins. Celeste abandoned her demolished blocks immediately, running to the elder with arms outstretched. Neve scooped her up with surprising strength, and I saw them exchange words too quiet for me to hear from the balcony. She's been teaching them, Thane said. Old stories, ancient laws, boundary keeper wisdom. Says it's her duty to pass on what she knows before she's gone. She's not that old. She's ancient, Vesper. Even for a werewolf. His voice held sorrow. She's preparing them. Preparing you. Making sure the knowledge survives her. The thought of losing Niev struck like a physical blow. She'd been a constant presence this past year, guide and mentor, and the closest thing to a grandmother the twins had known. As if sensing my thoughts, Niev looked up toward our balcony. Even from this distance, I saw the understanding in her eyes, acknowledgement that time was growing short, but also peace with what she'd accomplished. She set Celeste down, spoke briefly to Sienna, then made her way inside. Moments later, she appeared at our balcony doorway. "Walk with me," she said without preamble. "Both of you. There are things we need to discuss." We followed her through the residence to her private quarters, a room lined with books and artifacts, the accumulated wisdom of centuries. She settled into her chair with a sigh, gesturing for us to sit. "The Covenant Assembly that Karen proposes is crucial," she began without preamble. "It represents the formalization of everything we've been building. But it also represents my final contribution." "Niev," I started to protest. "Don't," she interrupted gently. "We all know I'm reaching the end. I've lived a long life, seen many changes, helped guide many leaders. But this, what you two are building, this is the culmination." She leaned forward intently. "The Assembly needs to succeed, Vesper. It needs to create lasting structures that survive individual leaders, that become self-sustaining." "What do you suggest?" Thane asked. "A formal Boundary Keeper Council," Niev replied. "Not just you, Vesper, but a trained cadre of mediators, some human, some werewolf, all committed to maintaining balance. You'll train them, establish protocols, create an institution that outlives any one person." "That will take years," I said. "Yes," Niev agreed. "But you have years. And you have the perfect training ground, your daughters. Celeste is already showing the gift. Train her properly, and she'll carry the tradition forward. Train others alongside her, and you'll ensure the Boundary Keeper role never dies out again." She pulled out a leather-bound journal I'd never seen before. "This contains everything I know, rituals, laws, histories that predate written records. I've been compiling it for you. By the Assembly, it will be complete." My hands trembled as I accepted the journal. "Niev, I don't know if I'm ready." "You're never ready," she said with a slight smile. "Your grandmother wasn't ready when I first approached her. Your mother wasn't ready when she chose to cross over. You weren't ready when you found Thane bleeding in the forest. But readiness isn't the point. Willingness is." She stood, moving to the window overlooking Silverbourne. "This city, this territory, this fragile piece we've built, it all rests on people being willing to choose the harder path. To build rather than destroy. To believe in possibility, even when cynicism would be easier." She turned back to face us. "You've already proven your willingness, both of you. Now you need to inspire it in others. The Assembly is your opportunity to do that on a scale that will reshape our world." Over the following months, preparations for the Covenant Assembly consumed everyone. Delegations were organized, protocols established, security arrangements made to accommodate both humans who feared werewolves and wolves who distrusted humans. I spent countless hours with Niev, absorbing everything she could teach me. The journal she'd created became my constant companion, filled with knowledge about Boundary Keeper rituals, ancient treaties, methods for resolving conflicts that dated back millennia. But more valuable than the written knowledge were the lessons she taught through example. How to read a room's emotional temperature, when to speak and when to listen. How to find common ground between parties convinced they had nothing in common. The greatest Boundary Keeper skill, she told me one evening as we reviewed Assembly preparations, is helping people remember their shared humanity, or in this case, their shared desire for safety, prosperity, and future for their children. Humans and werewolves want the same things, ultimately. Your job is making them see that. The twins also spent significant time with Niev. Celeste seemed to absorb knowledge like a sponge, her young mind grasping concepts that should have been beyond her years. Raven was less interested in formal learning, but she had an intuitive understanding of people and power dynamics that would serve her well as future leader. "They're going to be remarkable," Neve said one afternoon, watching Celeste successfully mediate a dispute between two older children with a wisdom beyond her years. "But they'll need guidance. Promise me you'll train them properly, Vesper. Don't let fear of their youth prevent them from developing their gifts." "I promise," I said. Understanding this was more than casual advice. It was a charge, a responsibility being passed from one generation to the next. Spring arrived in a rush of green growth and warming temperatures. With it came delegations from across the region, all 5 werewolf territories, representatives from 15 human settlements, even observers from distant regions curious about what we were building. The assembly would take place over 3 days at a neutral location, the Covenant Cave, where I'd first proven my boundary keeper blood. The site had been expanded and prepared to accommodate hundreds, with pavilions erected outside for those who couldn't fit within the sacred space. The night before the assembly began, Thane found me pacing our quarters, too anxious to sleep. "What if I fail?" I asked, voicing the fear I'd been suppressing. "What if the delegations can't reach an agreement? What if this all falls apart?" He pulled me close, his solid presence grounding my spiraling thoughts. "Then we try again. And again. However many times it takes. But Vesper, you won't fail. I've watched you build trust with humans who hated werewolves and wolves who despised humans. You've already done the impossible. This is just making it official." Neve said. "Neve knows you're ready," he interrupted gently. "That's why she's trusting you with everything she's built. Not because you're perfect, but because you're willing to keep trying even when it's hard." I leaned into him, drawing strength from his certainty. "I love you," I whispered. "I love you too," he replied. "And tomorrow, we're going to show the world what that love has built. Not just between us, but between our peoples." The first day of the assembly arrived with clear skies and perfect weather, a good omen, people murmured. Inside the Covenant Cave, beneath the ancient paintings showing wolves and humans joined in peace, I stood before the gathered delegates and called the assembly to order. "We come together," I began, my voice steady despite the butterflies in my stomach, "not as conquerors or conquered, not as separate peoples grudgingly tolerating each other, but as partners seeking common ground. What we build here over the next 3 days will shape the future for generations." The assembled delegates, a mix of humans, werewolves, and a few other supernatural beings who'd requested observer status, listened with varying degrees of skepticism and hope. Over the next 3 days, we hammered out agreements. Trade protocols ensure fair exchange. Dispute resolution systems that respected both human and werewolf law. Educational exchanges allow young people to learn about other cultures. Border management that protected territory while allowing peaceful passage. It wasn't easy. Arguments erupted, old grievances surfaced, and twice I thought the entire assembly might collapse into chaos. But each time, we found ways forward, through compromise, through appealing to shared interests, through reminding everyone what was at stake. On the 3rd day, as the sun set and the full moon rose, we finalized the Covenant Charter. A document that formalized everything we discussed, created the Boundary Keeper Council I would lead, and established mechanisms for ongoing cooperation. As representatives from each delegation signed the charter, I felt Neve's presence beside me, though she'd been too weak to attend the final session. "We did it," I whispered to Thane as the last signature was added. "You did it," he corrected. "This was your vision, your work." But I knew better. This was the work of generations, of Morgana and other boundary keepers who'd maintained the old ways, of Neve who'd preserved ancient wisdom, of Thane and other progressive leaders who'd been willing to change, of humans like my mother who'd chosen love over fear. I was just the one standing at the convergence point, the bridge that connected all their efforts. As the assembly concluded and delegates began departing, promises to implement the charter made and witnessed, I returned to Silverborn with a sense of profound accomplishment. But also loss. Niev had grown weaker during the assembly, her ancient body finally surrendering to time. Thane and I went to her quarters immediately upon our return. She lay in her bed, looking smaller than I'd ever seen her, but her eyes remained bright. "It worked?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "It worked," I confirmed, kneeling beside her bed. "The charter is signed. The Boundary Keeper Council is established. Everything you hoped for." A smile touched her lips. "Good. Then I can rest, knowing the work continues." "Niev." "Don't mourn, child," she interrupted gently. "I've lived long enough, seen enough, accomplished what I set out to do." Her eyes moved to Thane. "Protect her, young king, and let her protect you. That's how this works." "I will," Thane promised, his voice rough with emotion. Niev's gaze returned to me. "Train Celeste well. She has the gift, stronger than any I've seen in generations. And Raven too, she'll need to understand Boundary Keeper work even if she follows the Alpha path. Both of them are bridges, just in different ways." "I promise," I said, tears streaming down my face. "Good." Her eyes drifted closed. Tell them I'm proud. Of all of you, the future is bright." Her breathing slowed, then stopped. Peacefully, naturally, like someone's simply choosing to sleep after a long day's work. Elder Niev, first of the council, keeper of ancient wisdom and guide to generations of leaders, was gone. The funeral took place 3 days later, attended by hundreds from all territories. Wolves howled their mourning, humans wept openly, and I stood before her pyre feeling simultaneously lost and determined. "She gave us the tools," I said in my eulogy. "The knowledge, the structures, the belief that peace was possible. Now we honor her memory by continuing the work, by building on the foundation she helped lay, by ensuring that what she fought for lives beyond her." As the flames consumed her body, releasing her spirit according to werewolf tradition, I felt Celeste's small hand slip into mine. Raven stood on my other side, unusually solemn. "Gamma Niev gone?" Celeste asked, using the word for grandmother she'd assigned the elder. "Yes, sweet one," I said, kneeling to be at her level. "But everything she taught us remains. Her wisdom, her love, her hope for a better world. That lives on through us." "We build bridges?" Celeste asked, her dark eyes serious. "We build bridges," I confirmed, "just like she taught us." "I help," Celeste declared firmly. "Me too," Raven added, not wanting to be left out. I pulled them both close, these impossible children who carried the future in their blood and bones. Behind me, Thane's hand rested on my shoulder, solid and supportive. Around us, humans and werewolves stood together in shared grief and shared determination. The bridge was holding. More than that, it was growing stronger. 5 years later, I stood on the balcony of the new Boundary Keeper Council headquarters, a building that straddled the border between Central Territory and the closest human settlement, physically representing our mission of connection. Inside, 12 new Boundary Keepers trained, 6 human, 6 werewolf, all committed to maintaining the peace we'd built. Celeste, now 6 years old, was already assisting with training, her natural gift for mediation evident in every interaction. Raven had shown her first alpha tendencies, organizing the other children and leading them in elaborate games that usually ended with everyone covered in mud but laughing. The Covenant Charter had been adopted by 20 territories and settlements now, with more joining each year. Trade flourished, conflicts were resolved through established channels, and children were growing up knowing humans and werewolves as neighbors rather than enemies. It wasn't perfect. Challenges remained. Traditionalists on both sides who resisted change, economic disparities that required constant attention, cultural misunderstandings that sometimes flared into conflict. But we'd built something lasting, something that would survive individual leaders, that had become self-sustaining. Thane joined me on the balcony, as he so often did during my rare moments of quiet reflection. "The Southern Territory just sent word," he said. "They want to host next year's Covenant Assembly. Says it's time to show the world that even the most traditional territories have accepted the new way. I leaned into him, marveling at how far we'd come. Neov would be proud. She is proud, Thane replied. Wherever she is, I'm certain of it. Below, in the training yard, Celeste was demonstrating proper mediation technique to a group of apprentices twice her age. Raven raced past on all fours, shifted into her wolf form and clearly enjoying the freedom of it, while Sienna called after her about staying close. This was the world we'd built. Not through force or domination, but through patience and persistence. Through choosing bridges over walls, again and again, even when it would have been easier to retreat into fear. Tell me again, I said to Thane, repeating a ritual we'd developed over the years. Why do we do this? Because someone has to, he replied, the familiar words of comfort. Because the future demands it. Because our daughters deserve a world where they're celebrated, not condemned, for carrying both human and wolf blood. And because, I prompted. And because love, real love, always builds bridges, he finished, pulling me close. Between people, between species, between worlds. That's what we've proven. That's what will outlast us both. In the distance, the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The boundary line that had once divided our peoples was now just a line on a map, crossed freely by those brave enough to choose connection over division. We had built our bridges, and they would stand. The end. Moonlit souls, we've reached the end of Vesper and Thane's journey. From a desperate night in the Forbidden Forest to a future bright with possibility, we've watched two broken people become whole through love and courage. We've seen bridges built where walls once stood, hope planted where fear had taken root. This is the power of choosing connections. The strength found in standing between worlds and refusing to let either define you completely. The legacy that comes from believing peace is possible and working toward it every single day. Thank you for joining the Wild Alpha Tales pack on this journey. Until the next moon rises, keep building your own bridges. You never know what impossible things might become real when you're brave enough to try.